Higher Education for Thursday, April 27th. If I could call on Christy Hetzler to begin with roll call.
Chair Nesset,
Here.
Mr. Morton,
Here.
Dr. Melliker,
Here.
Mr. Steeman,
Here.
Mr. Evans,
Here.
Ms. Reichert, Mr. Ness,
Here.
Mr. Hacker,
Here.
Mr. Wakeford,
Here.
Dr. Piney,
Here.
All right, thank you very much. Well, welcome to everybody. Welcome from Minot State University. We are located here at Minot State. I'd like to thank Dr. Steve Shirley for hosting us. Thank you very much. Also like to put some thanks out to Bismarck State IT team, Dustin, Cole, and Jesse. We understand that you started on the road yesterday and got turned around. You are providing us with an Ivan connection. This is going to be a live stream meeting, so everybody is aware of that. I'd also like to thank Darren Olson here at Minot State for taking care of us and getting us set up with IT from Minot State University. And our apologies to anyone for any inconvenience of the change of venue here for the meeting. And I'll just reach out, Dr. Bashani, how are you doing for weather in Fargo?
We wouldn't want to be out driving around town right now. It's pretty icy.
Well, we're glad everybody is safe and in their respective campuses once again. So this is the beauty of technology. We can adapt quite quickly to this type of situation. I would like to recognize a couple of guests that we have with us here at Minot. Dr. Bob Sando is a retired dean of the College of Business. Thank you very much for joining us, Doctor. And I'd also like to recognize Dr. Zeni Shabani. Dr. Shabani, you are the president of the Faculty Senate here at Minot State. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate all your hard work and all the presidents of the faculties around the system.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
For having me.
You bet. Our guest at the meeting was to be our very favorite Minot State special guest, Senator Karen Kresbaugh. But as we all know, the legislature is still in session and Senator Kresbaugh is busy down in Bismarck. So we, in the spirit of her love for Minot State and all things for students of North Dakota, I will say thank you, Senator Kresbaugh. You are here with us in spirit, and we know that you work along with us, as does the entire legislature, for working together for student success. And we'll all keep that in mind today as we go through our agenda. With that, I would like to go to the agenda, item number 1, and this would be, are there any changes or revisions to the agenda as presented? If not, could we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Milliker, second.
Christie?
Dr. Meliker,
Yes.
Mr. Hacker,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Ms. Reichert, Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset,
Yes. Thank you. Item number 2, minutes. We have minutes before us presented prior to the meeting from February 23rd, 2017 and March 30th, 2017 meetings. Are there any additions, corrections, and if not, a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as sent out.
Thank you.
Second.
Steeman.
Thank you. Christie?
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Ms. Reichert, Mr. Hacker,
Yes.
Dr. Meliker,
Yes.
Mr. Morton,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset,
Yes. Thank you. Moving on to policy for the board. We are at first reading of several policy issues, and I'll begin with first reading policy 340.2 regarding foundations and call on our board attorney, Mr. Nick Vaughn.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Lisa Feldner, Dr. Feldner can't be here today, so I'm going to address this policy. 340.2 outlines the institution-foundation relationship, and specifically it lays out the roles and duties and obligations that each party owes one another. Back in about 2015, revisions started to be considered for this policy following the receivership of the Dickinson State Foundation, now the pending dissolution of it. And we have worked pretty exhaustively in the last 18 months. I believe this has been to cabinet 3 times. It has been circulated to foundation directors on multiple occasions. There's been group meetings, individual meetings. I know the chancellor had a group meeting with the foundation directors about a year ago. Lisa and I have had individual meetings, phone calls. Dr. Melliker has been involved at the direction of the audit committee in some of those meetings. And just as a side note, one of the other reasons besides kind of the liability issues that arose from the Dickinson State Foundation dissolution was the state auditor has found, and I can look at Laura Shred, I think it's 4 years in a row, 3 years in a row. Yeah, I think we're coming on to our 4th year where there's been a finding by the state auditor that, in summary, our transparency and accountability at the system level over our affiliated foundations is insufficient, and it has warranted prior not implemented findings from the state auditor due to legislation passed in this session that can also result in a loss of appropriations if the Legislative Audit Finance Review Committee deems it significant enough. So it's important to address. All that said, I think the liability issues that arose from the Dickinson State situation were pretty isolated, and our foundations are a vital part of this system. They're important. It's important that they're independent, and they maintain that status. They provide a valuable service to the institutions, whether it's raising money, it's providing incubators for business, industry. They're very important. And I do think we're at a point now with this policy where we've reached, I won't call it consensus from everybody, but I think I can summarize and say everyone is pretty happy with where we are. Just to summarize that your proposed action sheet has all of the changes outlined, but the major changes are, one, changing the name of the policy from foundation to nonprofit affiliates and having that mentioned throughout, because there's several affiliated institutions that aren't, or I'm sorry, affiliated organizations to our institutions that fall under this policy that aren't foundations. They're other nonprofits, so we wanted just to have a broader term for that. We have gone ahead and asked, or as part of the operating agreements that each institution will have with the nonprofit affiliate, as required by this policy, that the nonprofit affiliate adopt a conflict of interest policy, that certain events are reported. I think that was a big thing that the state auditor found, was that we didn't have that transparency with kind of the dealings of a foundation or nonprofit. There's a requirement that the president of the affiliated institution serve in a non-voting ex officio role. And there's several other changes that really speak to better communication, transparency. Again, we're not telling foundations or nonprofit affiliates what to do and how to do it. That's their responsibility, and frankly, they need to have that authority for their nonprofit status. But there is more accountability and transparency at the board and system level. So with that, I can take questions. This is just for first reading, so we're able to also make changes based on feedback, but I can take any questions that there are.
Mr. Vaughn, thank you very much. We appreciate that summary. I want to bring this from you mentioned that this was brought as high priority from audit, Laura Schratt. Our audit committee, the one thing that you mentioned that was so important, and I want everyone to realize, this is prior not implemented. This is
I'm
very
hearing nothing right now.
okay.
Nick, can you hear us?
I can hear you all.
You can hear us, Nick?
Yes, I can.
Bismarck? Okay.
Oh, should we do a voice check?
Yeah, could we do a voice check? Darren, can you check that all the campuses, or Christy, who would be the proper person to check a voice check here? Christy, can you just do a quick voice from each one of the Ivan locations for us? Could you do a voice check?
I believe Jesse's about to do it right now.
Give me a minute, I'll pull up the list again. We did do a roll call earlier,
This is Greg.
and
I can
everybody was
now
present,
hear
but
you.
Wapaton did not reply. Devil's Lake, are you there?
Yes, this is Doug Darling of Lake Region. I can see and hear you clearly.
Thank you, Devil's Lake. Dickinson, are you there? Dickinson? I see ya.
This is Carmen from Dickinson. I'm here.
I see and hear you. Thank you very much, Dickinson. Fargo, are you there?
Fargo and NDSCS are both here.
See ya. Thank you very much. UND.
Mark Kennedy, Dr. Ryan, reporting from Grand Forks.
Hi, see you. Thank you very much, Grand Forks. Mayville.
This is Gary Hagan. I can hear and see everyone fine.
Thank you. Wapaton. And then Williston. Are you there?
This is John Miller. Yep, we've got everybody fine.
Everybody's here and able to see and hear us. Thank you.
Also, everybody on the telephone call-in line, could you make sure to keep your phone muted until you wish to speak? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Just to follow up, the audit committee found this very important. This is prior not implemented items that came through audit committee, working with Dr. Melliker and Mr. Steeman. And I want to stress the importance of having this dealt with. For board members, are there any comments, any discussion on foundations policy first reading?
Madam Chair, I do have a question.
I have no audio.
Dr. Mason, we hear you. Do you hear our conversation?
Yeah, this is Greg. Tisa said the same thing. The phone call has no audio. We were fine, perfect up until Nick finished his presentation. Otherwise, we hear nothing.
Mr. Steeman and Dr. Mason, are you two at the same location or at the same telephone? They're not hearing us. Yeah, Bismarck, can you assist with the telephone connection that appears to be lost with Dr. Mason?
Yes.
And the one with Mr. Steeman?
Yep, we'll look into it. Stand by.
We'll take a 5-minute recess while we adjust the telephones here. We'll resume at 9:19 Central Time. the assist. At this point, we would like to reconvene. Right, we are in the discussion phase of policy reading 340.2 foundations, and Mr. Nick Hecker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, and this question's for Nick Vaughn. Nick, how do you determine or know whether or not a nonprofit / foundation applies under this new policy? Some institutions have multiple foundations. The university system has a foundation or that's got a nonprofit status. How do you determine whether or not a foundation, that these rules apply to that foundation?
Madam Chair, Member Hackett, that's a good question. I think subsection 2 of the policy speaks to this, but still that the wording is going to have to be defined on a case-by-case basis, meaning a nonprofit affiliate is defined as an independent and legally separate nonprofit organization established to support and advance the mission and objectives of an institution or institutional functions. I think we have instances where there's nonprofits that are just either developing state land that may not have a institutional function, and so, or they're not supporting an institutional function, so they wouldn't fall under the operating and reporting requirements. That said, they would have a lease or some other contract with the state board and system that would allow for certain requirements to be met as part of that lease. But I do think the language that's key is identifying what means to support an institution or an institutional function. So if a nonprofit's doing that, then it falls under this policy.
Can I ask just one additional clarifying question?
Yes, thank you.
So Nick, would you interpret this language to apply towards foundations or nonprofits that are educational in nature and maybe they just give out scholarships? There's numerous of those as well, and would those apply here? If it's purely for giving out scholarships to an institution's students?
Madam Chair, Member Hacker, I think just that alone wouldn't be enough, but you'd have to look at the context of other circumstances. If it's some national foundation that just provides scholarships and they have and this is just off the top of my head, they have some initiative where they're focusing on North Dakota University system institutions, then I don't think that entire national foundation would fall under this because there would be no need for an operating agreement at that time. But if it's, a foundation that, for example, the alumni and development foundations of our institutions give scholarships, but they also raise money on behalf of the institution and the institution has delegated that function to them, then yes, this policy applies. So I think the context is really what's going to drive whatever is kind of the ultimate determining factor of whether or not this falls into the policy.
Okay, Madam Chair, if I could just
Yes.
continue to expand. Nick, what about, and I hate that, I'm trying to drill down to identify if we're going to run into some problems. There are Greek organizations across our system and within different institutions that might have a Greek chapter on campus that raises money from their alumni, which are UND graduates, and then gives those monies out to the undergraduates that are members of that Greek organization attending that institution. Is that going to qualify?
Madam Chair, Member Hacker, I can say that wasn't the intent of this, was for that to happen. If we need to clarify that a little more, we can in the policy, but that was not my understanding. Prior to my arrival, I know the former Council and Chief of Staff, Murray Sagsveen, did essentially an audit of all the foundations and nonprofit affiliates, and those were not included in the metrics that he was using. But if this definition is too broad for the board's liking, we can certainly revise it and kind of bring it back so that issue is addressed on second reading.
Madam Chair, maybe if Nick could come up with some ways to exclude some sort of exclusionary language that ensures we're not encompassing foundations that we really are not really not that well closely tied to the institution. And that gives us kind of some defining language that says we're not intending to apply this to every single nonprofit or foundation, but just those that are primary drivers for the institution. I don't know if there's some, this is kind of like making sausage. I understand it's really challenging to draft this, but just to ensure we don't have unintended consequences.
Sure, I can do that.
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Vaughn, I think part of that, yeah, you had brought up the part, case by case study. Maybe we could make a little more defined statute here, within this policy. So we have some guidelines for the future. Any future discussion or questions?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
is there any chance we can look at the operating agreement that has been put together through our committee work and see if that solves member hackers' concerns? It would seem to me that with so many monies coming to institutions in so many different ways, we probably would have a policy that might be 300 pages long trying to take a look at each and every one of those, but fully understanding that we need to make sure that the foundations are operating within the guidance and the mission of the university. So maybe the operating agreements is one area that we could take a look at.
Thank you, Dr. Melliker. Mr. Vaughn, perhaps we can, guide you in that direction.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a look at, I guess it would be subsection 3, kind of working maybe some further requirements or definition into that.
Thank you. We have a question here from Dr. Pining.
Actually two, but let me first pose the first one. Do you think that it would be possible to have a kind of an exemption so that the board can actually, if it would still follow within a policy, but it's very obvious not what we like, that there is some kind of provision that the board simply can make this determination? Or would that be too difficult?
I'm sorry, I don't know, Dr. Pining, if you're too far from the mic, but I had trouble hearing, particularly the last part of that.
Sorry. Excuse me. Do you think it would be possible to have an exemption in the policy so that the board can determine itself that these particular organizations would be exempted from the policy? So if a certain provision could be in there to have that mechanism there.
Madam Chair, Dr. Pining, that's certainly possible. I think that could result in a lot of requests and clarification coming to the board, where I don't know if this is something where we want to have guiding language that then vests that responsibility with the institutions to make that call on an individual basis, but it's certainly something that we can explore.
Thank you. Dr. Pining, you had a second question?
Yes. Does this policy mean that the legislature will have much more oversight over the different foundations, especially when it comes to buildings?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Pining, this policy doesn't do that. I think, depending on what comes out today, there may be some more requirements in statute, but this policy doesn't do anything on that front.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Hearing none, we would look for a motion to approve first reading with the directives back to our legal counsel, Mr. Vaughn. If we have a motion to approve first reading of policy 340.2.
Kevin Milliker, so moved.
Melliker, thank you. Second?
Second.
Mr. Hacker, thank you. Christie?
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert? Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 4, first policy reading, policy 305.1, college and university presidents' authority and responsibilities. We'll call on Chancellor Agarath.
Yes, well, thank you, Madam Chair. So we talked about this on and off. So just to quickly situate the board members, the security of campuses in this emerging cyber age is becoming one of the most important priorities, quite frankly, for the federal government and WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission, and of course some of my own background interest. So this policy is a concrete step in just elevating the importance of this responsibility in the presidents. They already had it probably de facto if things would go wrong, but literally ransomware, national competitors of the United States are targeting universities across the country, in some cases shutting down hospitals, extracting money, and so we will be doing not just this policy adjustment, but several other measures that I'll talk about in the Chancellor's report going forward to improve our system resilience. But this policy change is fairly straightforward. It's subparagraph M, which is interesting to look at it. There was nowhere, until this policy change, there was nowhere in here that actually directed the presidents that you are accountable for information systems and data. And you can see the old words there, funds, equipment, and other facilities, but information, the data, is becoming one of the major components of wealth in companies and, quite frankly, in universities, especially our research universities, but also our students' data, dwarfs, parking lots and warehouses. So it clarifies that, and the benefit for the president, and any of the presidents can tell you, with the huge complex organizations they have to delegate a lot of things to people, and this just reminds them when they have to ask penetrating questions of their wonderful IT staffs who are on the front line every day. They're not being burdensome. They are following the direction of the board, that they have to be involved. They have to understand what's going on. And so that's the benefit of that. But then also an annual report, which becomes a priority on how they're continuing to improve. And this also, I want to compliment the Chancellor's Cabinet. They share information of their best practices. And I just want to thank them again, whether it's the K-12 initiative we had or shared services, that I also see this as a way of institutionalizing how places are improving, especially the big universities with their larger staffs, that this is a way to have those continuous improvements coming to me and to the board. So again, nothing radical here. They're doing most of this already, but it just delineates very clearly, which hasn't been before, of the high importance, presidential level importance. And just to punctuate this, there was a major corporation that was hacked a couple years ago, and one of the key findings was the president of the company did not have it on their responsibilities to receive briefs from their chief information security officer. So you can imagine all the demands on a president's time. Well, this right here will help if there's any scheduling issues or anything where people compete for the president's time, that the chief information security officer can also say, I need to be on the schedule. I need to be in those meetings, because this is a direct report relationship that actually has to be codified each year. So it also just clarifies for all the people out there the importance the board attaches to this.
Chancellor, thank you very much. Board members, I just want to remind you that all of this information and the wording or rewording of this document is in our board materials, provided to you digitally via the links in our materials. So if you want to, follow along closely with the actual wording, I'll remind you that it's there digitally via the links. Are there any questions or comments regarding the Chancellor's presentation?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Hacker.
Madam Chair, and I'm sure that significant discussion occurred around this policy. My question really involves how much actual control does a university president have over a few specific items? One, all of the things that have been consolidated into CTS, and how could they be responsible for things that occur through CTS, as well as the consolidated email system. That's generally where hacks come in. And so if it's not really, I'd like to understand things that are not in their purview, how they could be held responsible. It's very broadly written.
Oh, thank you, Member Hack, for the question. We have a CIO council that is actually made up of all the campuses, and you're correct. There are certain things that CTS controls outer perimeter firewalls for the overall system, and when emails consolidated. These are things that are under their control. For example, we've had recent events at different campuses, and very clearly it was identified in the after-action reports that these were local level actions taken by people loading software that then was attacked. So we have both people involved locally that have vulnerabilities as well as system-wide. So we're not making the presidents accountable for something they don't have control over. And if there's, of course, we are open to any feedback. If for some reason the CTS staff would try to hold them accountable for something out of control board, that's what we would then deliberate about, clarifying those lines.
Thank you. Any further questions, board members? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve first reading policy 305.1?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Christie, roll call vote?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert? Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item 5, first reading policy 505, international student health insurance. Call on Dr. Richard Rothaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Policy 505 is our policy that requires international students to have health insurance coverage. We are offering a revision to this policy that goes along with some reorganization of our health insurance plans for students. To recap briefly, we've been working with our insurance provider, United Healthcare, to separate out our plans for domestic and international students. We've had numerous complaints from the international students that our health insurance is disproportionately expensive. So we've gone to a standard that is used by most of our neighboring systems, which is to have separate coverages for domestic and international students. This does have the effect of dramatically decreasing the insurance premiums for international students. Unfortunately, it also has the effect of dramatically increasing the premiums for our domestic students. I've been meeting with students groups. I've traveled to UND and NDSU to talk to students about this. We'll continue to do so. Both of our international plan is now quite competitive. Our domestic student plan is half or less than half the cost of equivalent coverage on the healthcare exchange. So we're still offering value plans and doing the best we can. This is, as I tell the students, a situation where the best we can hope for is the least worst solution. There are no perfect solutions to these health insurance issues. As part of this rearrangement, we are tightening up, or would like to tighten up, our policy on waivers for international students. This is a development that came from our Student Health Insurance Task Force and from the campuses. The feedback we heard from the campuses was that they're spending, those who do waivers for international students are spending a disproportionate amount of time doing the waivers. I've also fielded many complaints about the difficulty of the process, and our camera has disappeared. Can I confirm that people are still hearing me?
Dr. Rothaus, we can hear you and see you.
Okay.
From my nut.
Well, I apologize for the fact that you still have to look at me, but I'm glad you can hear me. The problem with the waivers as we have it set up now is, one of the problems is it requires a great amount of health insurance expertise to review the waivers and make sure that the plans the students are preventing meet the requirements for visas and other aspects. We, of course, don't have the expertise on all of our campuses to review these policies. And it's become clear, the more we've looked into it, that there are many companies out there marketing insurance to international students, making the claim that they are ACA compliant, which is a visa requirement. And in fact, they aren't ACA compliant if you dig deep enough down into the details of the plan. So our approach to this, to both reduce workload, make for our staff, make sure that the students are adequately covered, and also make sure that we are in compliance with visa requirements, is to limit waivers to exceptional circumstances, not, look, I found this plan on the internet, it's cheaper, so give me a waiver, but rather, my father works at the embassy and I get my insurance through the embassy, and you wish you had in coverage this good. So to keep it for those exceptional circumstances. We also, in item 3, have removed from the policy the statement that Canadian and Norwegian students are exempt from the policy. This is simply to move that into procedure, not to do away with that exemption, but rather to put it into procedure, as we think it's a detail that fits more in procedure than policy. That way, if there is a change in the healthcare systems of either of those two countries with which we have special relationships, we can respond by simply revising the procedure. And likewise, if we get an influx of students from a country that has a standardized healthcare system that we can evaluate once and be done with it, they can be added into the procedure without having to come to the full board.
Dr. Rothaus, thank you very much. Great report. Any questions, discussion by board members?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I might, this is Nick Evans. I said this when it came through Academic and Affairs Committee, but I just want to again thank Dr. Rothfuss for all his work on this policy. Since I joined the board last year, student health insurance is one of the key issues I've heard from students about, and I think this policy does a very good job of being the best solution for what we can serve the students with health insurance. So I just want to commend Dr. Rothfuss again and thank him for his work on this policy from the students.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We echo your sentiments and appreciate your words there. Are there any other questions or comments? Dr. Pining?
Just a quick question. Sorry. To Dr. Rothaus, does the procedure already exist?
The procedure has not yet been revised. We would I suppose, get started on that right away, depending on the results of the first reading here.
All righty, thank you very much, Dr. Rothaus. Any further discussion? And if none, do we have a motion to approve first reading, Board Policy 505?
Motion to approve.
And a second, Mr. Steeman, second, thank you. Christy?
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nassib?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item 6, first reading policy 607.5, faculty leave. We'll call on Carol Redmond, please.
Is this where you want me? Is this good? Okay. Good morning, Chair Nassib and members of the board. I think I'm echoing, so, all right. My name is Carol Redmond. I'm the compliance officer of the North Dakota University System. And I'm here today to present to you the draft proposal for the new policy 607.5, faculty sick leave. The policy that you are looking at has had a long journey and has undergone numerous and substantial modifications along the way. So first, I'd like to share just a brief history of the development of the policy and how we got to where we are today. The prior legislative assembly produced House Bill 1003, which included Section 42, mandating the correction of multiple data inconsistencies. One item specifically noted was faculty sick leave, because some institutions were accruing sick leave for faculty and some were not. North Dakota Century Code 54-06-14, annual leave and sick leave for state employees, states that, and I quote, annual leave and sick leave must be provided for all persons in the permanent employment of this state who are not employed under a written contract of hire, setting forth the terms and conditions of their employment. Because faculty have written contracts of hire setting forth specific terms and conditions of employment, this group of employees is not technically subject to this statute. This means that faculty are not automatically included in the terms of leave provided for state employees. In 2004, the State Board of Higher Ed passed an amendment to Policy 607.4, which directed each institution to adopt policies for faculty sick leave. At that point, several institutions adopted an accrual-based leave policy, which is the same or similar as the state staff employees policy. Some of these included a payout of 10% of the accrued balance of sick leave for those with 10 or more years of service at the time of separation. Other institutions adopted non-accrual leave policies, which enabled flexible arrangements for absences under the general provisions of contract law. In general, these non-accrual arrangements allowed absences as needed, with the faculty member or department informally working out coverage for classes or other responsibilities, with extraordinary circumstances being handled on a case-by-case basis. By having these two opposite types of sick leave policies among the institutions, this is what has resulted in the inconsistent policies identified by the state legislature. So in September of 2016, an initial faculty sick leave policy was drafted by NDUS staff. This called for a consistent non-accrual basis of policy and directed the institutions currently accruing leave to adopt a non-accrual policy and to freeze the current accrued balances so that they would not increase, but would be paid out per their original policies to the faculty members upon their separation from employment. There were immediate requests for further consideration and input. So a task force was formed in early November, consisting of 2 members from each institution. This group met weekly through January 2017 and thoroughly discussed every aspect of this topic. The task force also briefly discussed the similar question of annual leave and entertained a motion for a non-accrual annual leave policy. But ultimately, the task force finalized a policy for faculty sick leave only, with the intention of considering annual leave at a later date. The task force policy called for a consistent non-accrual sick leave policy for faculty. This policy preserved accrued leave balances already earned for future payout if applicable. It included provisions for short-term paid leave and long-term leave up to 6 months at full salary. Additional terms included 6 weeks paid childbearing leave and up to 12 weeks of paid dependent leave in a 12-month period. The Academic Affairs Council supported this policy and suggested that long-term sick leave could be paid at anywhere between 75% to 100% of contract salary as determined by the institution. The Administrative Affairs Council did not take a formal position on this policy, but did raise questions regarding fiscal impact, especially for the 12-week and 6-month paid leave terms. In addition, the system office received multiple individual communications expressing concern over both the potential fiscal impact and specific details of the policy. Many of these objected to the detailed terms and advocated for more institutional control over the specific details. So in response to this input, a greatly modified version of this task force policy was drafted by NDUS staff. This retained the non-accrual basis and the treatment of existing accrued leave balances, but removed most of the other specific details. This policy referenced the flexible nature of faculty schedules and the ability to arrange for absences when needed, with only minimal guidelines set and leaving specific details to the individual institutions to develop via procedure as needed. This version of the policy was sent to all councils and stakeholders by Chancellor Hageroth, requesting 2 weeks review and input to determine which details should be restored and how much should be left to the institutions and individual circumstances. To respond to the anticipated questions, An FAQ document was prepared which attempted to address the mechanics of handling non-accrual leave on an informal basis by specific examples. This policy included all faculty leave, including medical, family, and annual or personal leave. The Human Resources Council was named the lead council to continue moving this policy forward, and they were tasked with assimilating input from other councils and stakeholders and making final modifications to this policy. However, the HRC elected to go back to the original task force version of the policy and use that as the basis for writing a new version. The new policy that we're referring to as the HRC policy was sent to administrative and academic councils on short notice, along with the previous version, which had already were being considered. The Administrative Council had very little time to review the HRC policy and did not take a formal position on either policy, but continued to discuss concerns over potential fiscal impact. The CCF met and endorsed the HRC policy as the one they felt should be moved forward to the board. The Academic Affairs Council voted to support the HRC policy and discussed numerous alternatives and details at their meeting. This input was sent to the HRC, who adopted some of them in the final draft of their policy 607.5. The final HRC policy is the policy that you have in front of you and that you're considering today on first read. It provides for a consistent non-accrual policy for sick leave for all faculty. Existing accrued sick leave balances are retained, and institutions will determine the terms of use or payout. Short-term leave is defined as 5 consecutive contract days or less, when reasonable arrangements will be made to cover work responsibilities. Long-term sick leave, up to 6 months, will be paid at no less than 75% and no more than 100% of contract pay at the institution's discretion, if additional cost is incurred to cover contract responsibilities. Long-term sick leave may also require medical certification. Up to 12 weeks paid sick leave can be used to care for family members. Paid parental leave of up to 6 weeks is provided to care for a newborn, adoptive, or foster child. And all eligible leave is capped at 12 weeks, except for a serious health condition that could extend paid leave up to 6 calendar months. There are a few areas that merit further discussion, including the family and parental leave and potential fiscal impacts, along with the question of whether annual leave should be included in the policy with similar non-accrual terms. So in conclusion, today I'm presenting a first read of the most current draft of Policy 607.5 that was developed by the Human Resources Council. We are requesting direction from the board as to areas that need to be addressed further and modifications that need to be made in order to produce a final version of Policy 607.5 which can be supported by the board and implemented by the institutions. We are also mindful of the timing of the start of new faculty contracts and wish to have a final policy in place, if possible, before the new contract year begins. That concludes my introduction. I'm happy to take questions, and there are others in the room that have assisted with this policy development that I may also call on if needed.
Ms. Redmond, thank you very much. That was an excellent introduction for this faculty leave policy. Board members, are there any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I would...
This is Kevin Melliker, and I have a couple of questions.
Dr.
Madam
Melliker?
Chair. One of the questions that I have is that, do we have a shared leave policy among our faculty members at various institutions? For example, if a faculty member has exhausted their leave, sick leave policy, they are able to receive leave donations from other faculty members. I know many school districts and many businesses do have that. And is that something that is in this policy?
Chair Nassett and Member Melliker, that the idea of shared leave is one that is part of the state staff employee leave policy. Some of the institutions that have accrual policies currently, I believe that includes Lake Region, NDSU, perhaps Wahpeton. I'm not sure of all of them. Some of them also have included a shared leave term that goes along with that. I believe they each have individual details about how that works out. It may be simply among faculty and not among all employees. But these go along with the accrual-based policies that are already in place. Some of them do have them. The non-accrual policy would not include shared leave because, frankly, if you have a non-accrual policy that allows up to 6 months paid leave, there should not really be a need for additional leave after that point.
A couple follow-up questions to that. It would seem to me that from reading the policy and just thinking through this myself, that a 10-year payout at 10% does not seem fair, number one, to the person that has not utilized the leave. And number two, it places certainly financial strain on the institution to try to bring that institution to being whole again. So, you know, I would recommend taking a look, and I know this is a long-term discussion and certainly is not going to get talked through today, but what's wrong with a PTO type of plan or a paid time off plan where all leave and all sorts of benefits, financial benefits paid to employees are lumped together, and maybe for a 1 year or a pick 1 or 2 year time frame. And then at that point, then we start all over again, the clock starts again.
Madam Chair, Member Melker, and other board members, Member Melker brings up a very good point, and I neglected to clarify all of that. The 10% payout on the accrued sick leave balance is available for folks with more than 10 years employment history. That is exactly what the state employees currently enjoy, and that 10% is in Century Code, and that's in statute. So it just mirrors that policy. So that will really be nothing, that's really nothing new. That's what they're already doing. I believe at least one institution that has an accrual-based policy does not do a payout. And so certainly there were concerns there about requiring a payout. That's why we're leaving, this policy leaves that up to the institutions. But I had another point about that. I have looked at the fiscal impact of that. On average, over the last 5 years, those institutions that do have an accrual policy and do have the 10% payout have paid out about $200,000 a year over the last 5 years. Annual leave is a 100% payout, just incidentally, and that also mirrors the state policy, and that has been about twice as much, about $440,000 per year. Currently, the accrued leave balances that would be subject to payout are about $2 million for sick leave and about $4 million for annual leave. Of course, that would be paid out over the next 1 to 20 years whenever those employees would be retiring or separating. I just thought I'd throw in that little piece of fiscal impact. So I guess my point with that is that the payout is not anything new. It's what they're already doing. The benefit would be ceasing this practice so that those that already have earned an accrued balance would not lose it, but we would not be adding to that. Now, to speak to your second point, Member Melliker, the PTO idea of sick leave, just all leave together, that was somewhat addressed in one of the earlier versions where sick and annual leave were all a non-accrual basis. They weren't. I think the sticking point was, are there guidelines for days? And I think that would be something that folks would really need to discuss, what those guidelines would need to be. But in direct answer to your question, there is no reason that a non-accrual policy could encompass annual leave and sick leave separately or together. I think that's certainly possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Carrie Reichert.
Yes, Ms. Reichert.
I have quite a few questions, actually. So just to clarify, everything under, when we talk about sick leave, that assumes it's paid sick leave. It's not leave. Okay, because that's not, I don't actually think, I think that looks like it's an assumption in the policy versus actually being stated. And so then I think that, as I understand it, just to confirm, so anything less than 5 days, it's paid. It's just kind of a flexible work arrangement thing. You just figure it out. But if you're gone, it's paid. And then anything long-term is basically an FMLA standard for a serious medical condition, and it's 3/4 pay for up to 6 months. So it's essentially a short-term disability policy at 3/4 pay for 6 months. Do we have any short-term disability or long-term disability insurance coverage, and have we thought about buying that versus trying to use a sick leave policy to cover it?
Madam Chair, Member Reichert, yes, all faculty are covered by the standard, which is a long-term disability policy that begins after a 6-month waiting period. So I think that was why the 6 months was instrumental in that. And I do want to clarify that some of the institutions requested a 75% of salary payout during a long-term absence to cover the cost of hiring an adjunct or other faculty to cover. Other institutions felt strongly that they would continue their 100% contract pay.
So just to clarify, so we are saying it's 3/4 pay, it wouldn't be 100% pay.
As it's stated in policy right now, the institution can choose somewhere between 75 and 100%.
Have we looked at negotiating the when long-term disability would kick in? I mean, again, I think this would be so much simpler to manage and probably cheaper if it kicked over to an insurance carrier to manage after, say, 12 weeks or 18 weeks versus, 6 months.
Madam Chair, Member Reichert, that's a really good idea. I don't believe that we have researched the cost of shortening the waiting period. Is that exactly what you're discussing? To shorten the waiting period from 6 months to say 3 months, 12 weeks. We've not researched that as far as I'm aware. Jane, have we ever looked at that? Jane Grindy is shaking her head no, so we have not looked at that.
And then just another follow-up question, the dependent leave, care for dependent leave, it's essentially, so under FMLA, it's always job protected, doesn't have to be paid. We're saying that would be paid as well at 3/4 pay. And then parental leave or paternity leave, mom or dad, up to 12 weeks, but 6 weeks are paid, is that correct?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Member Reichert, yes, the intent was that 6 weeks would be paid and that up to 12 weeks could be taken, but the additional weeks would be unpaid as per FMLA.
I guess just a comment from my standpoint, this is an exceptionally generous policy. We've, I guess, in renegotiating faculty sick leave and trying to get to a standard, we've come up with something that is quite generous.
Madam Chair and Member Reichert, I would agree with you, and I believe that some of the terms that would be in this faculty sick leave policy are not enjoyed by staff employees at all. So I agree with you, it's quite generous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hacker?
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Member Reichert, some of the comments she made, and I want to kind of get into some of the paragraphs just a little bit further because I did ask Carol a few questions about some of the terminology being used, such as what's a dependent, and so she did give some review of paragraph 4, which talks about the family dependent leave. And I wanted to make sure that this was more encompassing and that we didn't leave somebody out that's maybe a legally appointed dependent of somebody. And so she actually dug into this to align new language for paragraph 4 with the North Dakota. Carol, I think it's not the Century Code. It's the administrative rules to define the dependent care. So it's more uniform with the rest of state employees. It's actually more encompassing than what was originally drafted. So it ensures that regardless of how you define the family, that it extends to more, whether it's a foster child, step parent, adopted child, and so forth. So my recommendation is I'm going to ask for 3 changes. This is one of them, and maybe those could be circulated between now and the second reading. I don't know if today needs to be the day that we would pour over them, but possibly Carol could circulate the revised language for number 4 that she drafted and did additional review to make sure it aligns with the administrative code. The other paragraph that I had, and I think Member Reichert was really pointing to this, is the parental leave. the way this is written, if two people are married and they one of them gives birth, both can get 6 weeks of paid leave, which is in my mind unheard of. It doesn't quite align. I understand the desire for the 6 weeks, and I fully support that. But I was wondering if there's maybe a way to define it as if there's two legal parents, that one of them and the institution can choose would get 6 weeks of paid, and maybe the other would get like 2, to be, I think would fit a little better in my mind. And so she did draft language for that as well, so that if both parents are employed by the system, yes, that one would get the 6, and then one would get a lesser amount, maybe 2, or I didn't really pick on the numbers very much, but I asked her to maybe draft something like that. And finally, the task force had originally not determined the total number of consecutive days when defining short-term leave. We have institutions of greatly varying size, complexity, and differences. And even within institutions, we have colleges that are very different in size and complexity, whether it's you're going from a biology lab of 8 students to a sociology class of 150. And how we address that vacancy, I think, and this is maybe a personal philosophy, is that decision for defining what that short-term sick leave duration, or how the institution will handle that, I believe that decision is best made at the campus level. And potentially even presidents could dictate that to colleges on how they want to handle the short-term leave. And so I would prefer some flexibility on the short-term sick leave, which is paragraph 3, to allow the institution to determine the appropriate period or circumstances considered short-term sick leave.
Ms. Redmond, you're taking notes on this, I take it.
Yes, Madam Chair. And if I could just add one more point to what Member Hacker just discussed on the determination of the guideline between short-term and long-term. I think it's really a philosophical one also, not, partly the need for coverage within the colleges. The other situation is, we hate to do a case-by-case basis because that seems to leave a lot up to judgment. However, there are some cases that on day 1, it will be evident that it's going to be a long-term absence due to the severity of the accident or whatever it is. There's also examples that have been brought up to me that if you have, say, a family and there's a progression of the flu going through for 2 or 3 days, the faculty member may be absent for more than 5 days, but this is clearly not a long-term situation. And for that reason, I think it really is hard to put a number on what the difference between short and long-term leave is. It's more of a short-term leave is we can work it out, we're in communication, and it's very time limited, in my opinion. So yeah, there's a lot of, it's really hard to legislate every detail.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms. Reichert.
Just on that note, I mean, I've obviously have experience dealing with this, and as I look at how you define long-term, I would just make the suggestion that to resolve a lot of these ambiguities, you just simply say a serious medical condition as defined by FMLA, and that provides you with all of the guidance legally that goes along with FMLA. And I noticed there's a note that medical certification may be required. I guess I would suggest it ought to be required for a serious health condition, and I would suggest, I don't know if you've looked into it, but potentially outsourcing FMLA management to a third party and just letting it all, and that way your HR folks don't have to make the determination about whether something is or is not a serious health condition. They would work with the medical providers and they would track all of the days and of absence. And I guess now that I think about it, perhaps FMLA doesn't apply to these contract employees. But you could still bring in that standard, I think, to define what a serious health condition is, and then potentially still use a third party to help. Because I guess, was there a reason why it would be discretionary whether or not medical certification would be required?
Chair Nassett and Member Reichert, that was the wish of the HRC. At one point, it was medical certification was required for any long-term absence, and then I believe that was modified just to soften it a bit.
I guess just in my experience, that would lead to potential inconsistency, and as you mentioned, so you also mentioned the staff are, recognize the discrepancy here. So how does this compare to what is available to staff? I know that's a complicated question, but just generally, these benefits are more generous than what's available to staff.
Yes, Madam Chair, Member Reichert, I may call on Jane Grindy just to clarify. Staff employees have accrued sick leave. Therefore, when they are ill, the short-term or long-term, they have up to their balance that is earned and stored up to use. And beyond that, it would be FMLA or donated leave. And here's Jane to give you the details.
Thank you, Carol. You're doing great. Madam Chair, Member Reichert, related to the inequitable comparison for staff, the main one is maternity. We do not have a maternity leave or parental leave policy for staff. It can be categorized that way. However, they need to accrue the leave in order to be paid for that event. So that is the main point of differentiation. Of course, staff are eligible for FMLA with medical certification, and that is up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, and they may use any accrued leave that they may have in their bank congruent with the FMLA time clock.
Ms. Gridley, thank you very much. Further questions from the board? Dr. Pining.
All right, stand by, everybody. We lost contact with Minot, and we'll connect with them in just a few minutes.
Right. Is Grand Forks still there, or did everybody lock up? Looks like everybody locked up.
Everyone's frozen.
Grand Forks is still here.
And the issue's still here.
Grand Forks is on.
All right, we'll give mine a little bit. Hopefully they will reconnect shortly. Hi, this is Jesse. We just got to give them a little bit because they'll have to reconnect. Everybody, we're going to do a 3-minute break. Minot's rebooting, and they should be with us shortly. And that static was somebody else. Greta Mercy. Mark,
Thank you. Okay. We'll prepare to reconvene.
Did I do that?
Madam Chair, if I may, in Bismarck, we did not hear anything that Dr. Pining said when he was.
That is what we realized. Yes, that is where we lost our communication. So Dr. Pining will be next up. We are ready to reconvene as soon as I see our board recorder, Christy, take her place, and our attorney. Okay, if we're ready to resume the meeting, we are. We apologize. We had an IT issue here, and Darren, thank you very much for.
Oh, no.
Again, looks like they locked up. We gotta wait a few bit. This is Minot. Hopefully they can reconnect in a little bit. Just so you know, that I know of, only your location is the one that disconnected. We were checking earlier. Let me take a look. Botno, are you there? Botno?
Botno is with us, yes, at Minot.
Okay. Devil's Lake,
Lake Region is here.
Dickinson, Fargo,
We're here.
UND,
We're here.
Mayville,
Mayville's connected, thank you.
Williston,
Yep, we're here.
and Wapaton didn't reply earlier, and Dickinson, no one's there.
Jesse, could you just confirm where Dickinson is? Do we have Dr. Menzel?
Dickinson, are you there? Nope, he's not replying. I could give the coordinator a call and let him know.
If you would.
Yep.
We will continue with our discussion here. May I ask, Mr. Vaughn, do you know if you heard any of Dr. Pining's remarks?
Madam Chair, no, we did not.
Thank you. We will resume with Dr. Pining.
Chair Nessa, members of the board, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. The first thing I would like to do is to thank Carol Riedman for all the work she has done for the sick leave policy. She's a trooper. She put so much work on this and wanted to know what everybody had to say about this and adjusted accordingly. It is really a lot of work. So it was a pleasure working with her. Saying that, what I would like to do is to comment to some of the comments that came out by board members, as well as some general comments that came up in the last one, especially when you compared staff policy, and for that matter, all policies, leave and sick leave policies that are available to all state employees, but faculty members. And that is that in those occasions, they accrue sick leave. And not only sick leave, but also in general leave. And that means that those days that are available to staff members as well as all other state employees can be used towards sick leave, such as parental leave. So when the task force decided not to accrue sick leave, they did it for various reasons. One of them is it doesn't really fit in what faculty do. And it also had to be tracked, which would be actually a lot of work for human resource persons. So the whole idea was, in those occasions, is to say that instead of that, we need to have something in place. Faculty do not take regular leave unless it is for professional development. So we do not use leave at all. Again, there's an exception to that. It is for 12 months faculty, because they're on 12 months contract, but in generally it doesn't happen. We just teach during the times that we're supposed to teach, and maybe during the breaks, that is when we go away. Faculty on the short term will also replace other faculty who are ill, who cannot be there. We do not charge any money for that. We just replace them because they're our colleagues and the students need to be taught. So that's what faculty do, and that is why our policy is also a little bit different. Now, not accruing means also that in those occasions when faculty are having children, or when they are parents, or where they have to take care of other people who are ill in their families, then we actually we need to be replaced for those periods. Usually what happens in those periods is other faculty members who are taking that over. So in other words, we find replacement for it, we work it out, and I have not heard that unless it's for a much longer time that we have new contracts that replace those faculty members. So in other words, it doesn't really cost the institution too much. So what the faculty really would like to have is certainty in those uncertain times. So whenever there are leave policies, we would like to have some minimums in place. We would like to say, okay, this is at least what the institution will do. One of the largest problems actually has been that it has been on ad hoc basis. And I'm going to look around me, for instance, when faculty members are pregnant, Usually, by the way, they get pregnant over the summer so that we don't even have to deal with these issues. I don't, by the way. But am I incorrect with that? You know, it usually happens, but you know how it goes. You know, sometimes it doesn't. We don't know when that is happening. For some interesting cases with that, but that's a whole other issue. But you know, we figure things out because we want our students to do well, and we want our students to succeed. So the policy needs to take those kind of issues into account. So what I'm asking from you is a policy that gives minimums, that gives guarantees, where we know beforehand what we're going to be up to. Outsourcing policies, I think it is exactly the close relationships between the Human Resource Council and the Human Resource people and the faculty and staff for that members that is so of crucial importance. So outsourcing those things, I wouldn't be very much in favor of that. Letting the standard replace it, then we have to look extremely careful what the policies of the standards are, because the policies of the standards are not always applicable. Again, usually if faculty members get into long-term diseases, they have been in institutions for many years. If you would have been a staff member, you would have accrued to sick leave. If you're a faculty member, you are not, because at this moment we cannot accrue anymore. So I think it's a kind of a balance between the one and the other. This policy, as it has been brought forward, has been well thought out. The Human Resource Council thought about this. The Academic Affairs Council, which consists of the provost, endorsed the policy. So I don't know whether this policy would cost a lot of money, which is one of the things that the financial officers will probably look at. But my question is, give this policy a chance. Let it see if it works. If it doesn't work, we can always change this in a year from now. But why not let it work in the way it is and maybe make some little adjustments if necessary. But as such, this policy, I think, is fair.
Dr. Pining, thank you. Any additional comments, board members?
Madam Chair, this is Carrie again.
Yes.
We were just kind of talking and, you know, during our break here, and I guess one of the things that I think we're also doing here is adding some complexity and administrative burden, and in the interest of being fair, giving everyone the same amount of days, you know, because I think I completely agree with Dr. Pining. I mean, it sounds like on a short-term basis, you guys just work it out, which is great. On a longer, you're just worried about kind of ensuring or hedging against those more serious situations. And so what about something very simple that just says X number of days each year for a serious health condition for you or a child, and birth of a baby, or something, you know, that's pretty straightforward, that maybe reduces the burden on administration. And that's just maybe a question for you too, Carol or Jane. You know, is something like that preferable? Reduces some of the complexity of it.
Madam Chair and Member Reichert, something like a block of days granted to each faculty member, it sounds like, is what you're maybe suggesting. And that was, that has been in and out of policy as well in one of our iterations. And I think it, you know, certainly it's a good idea. What I can tell you that the institutions that already accrue, that are accustomed to tracking and having a number in mind, felt that that would work. The institutions that didn't accrue also didn't want to go that direction, because then, again, you're tracking and you're limited, and what would that number be that would, you know, solve any problem? So that's, excuse me, that is one solution that certainly can be looked at. And you know, nothing is really clear-cut and easy, because all of our institutions have very different priorities and different situations. So I think that's why it's taken so long.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Ness?
Yeah, I agree with Carol and Dr. Pining on this. I think it's worth giving a try. They've done a lot of work on this. It simplified it, and I think it simplifies the paperwork that would be done. Accruing leave is very difficult. I've been in those situations, and I know it's very time-consuming for the people that have to do that. So I think this would actually simplify that process. And it's a uniform system that I think we need across our entire system, and I like the concept of it. There was a discussion on PTO time, and I've done a fair amount of work on that, negotiating with staff at K-12 systems. It doesn't work very well for a 9-month employee because the minimum becomes the maximum, and it becomes vacation leave. So if you put in 5 or 10 days for PTO time on a 9-month employee, they use that as vacation leave, and I know many of the schools that had that had done away with that, so I would not push toward a PTO system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ness. And, I want to say that, this is excellent discussion. Ms. Reichert, thank you. You brought a lot of good points to this discussion, and that's the purpose of this. This is what we're trying to do, is to give feedback to the crew, to the team, to the experts, Carol Redmond and Jane Grindy, to work towards the final reading of this policy. So appreciate that. Is there any further discussion, questions before the board at this time? Chancellor Hagerat.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my thanks to the system staff. As people know, we're a fraction of the size of the staff it was a couple of years ago, but the responsibilities in many ways like this demonstrated have not gone down. And I just want to compliment the staff, but also an emphasis on Ms. Redmond, because this was very emotionally charged at times. And throughout this, she was collecting improvement ideas on the process and working with Ms. Schratt. We've actually identified process improvements from this. And so again, I just want to thank her especially and the staff, how they've worked this and just her objectivity. She took no sides. She wanted to get the mission done and be a fair collector of input and data. I just want to thank her for that. So.
Chancellor, thank you. Any further questions, comments? Hearing none, may we have a motion to approve first reading of policy 607.5?
So moved. This is Mike Ness.
Oh, Kevin Melliker, so move.
Thank you. We'll take a second from Dr. Melliker. Christy?
Ms. Reichert?
No.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Okay, at this point, I believe it might be appropriate to take a short 10-minute break. We did just break with the technical issue, but I do believe a 10-minute break officially would be in order at this point. We'll resume at 10:41. Thank you. Chancellor Hagerott, we have Chancellor's report.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm mindful that we have had good discussion and we're still shooting to get out of here around the noon time. So I'll go kind of fast, but a lot goes on that doesn't necessarily hit the policy categories and board business. And so I just want to thank the board, all the work the committees are doing, the staff, whatnot, you know, that we're working at 3 levels practically continuously, the day-to-day, the budget that's in the out years, and then also the long-term planning, for example, in Vision 2030. And campuses are doing something similar. So I just want to hit a couple high points of what's going on. First off, with regard to the budget, as you notice, there won't be a budget legislative report because we are still in that, but I just had a text from Tammy Dolan that our budget should go to a vote perhaps at the top of the hour. And so we might have some news before we even leave here. And on that point, I just want to thank the board members who are engaged in legislative session. We're going to continuously improve that, your involvement, how we develop our positions, but several things that would have been very damaging, I think, to the system. For example, the quotas, we testified, we got that under control, and there's no evidence that will show up anywhere because I know things can be added at the last minute, but some really good work was done. It looks like the budget will hold at 80% where we started with the governor, and a lot of complex policies. As you recall, there were pages of those items. So for Dr. Feldner, Tammy Dolan, Dave Creswell, all the people involved, thank you for that. I'm also mindful the faculty and the staff are under huge pressures, and we did receive the letter from NDSU, and I've already met with 2 campus faculty groups to meet with some lineup representatives today. And we're mindful of the cuts. I just saw a headline today, Wahpeton is going to lose 14% of their faculty and staff workforce. I mean, these are among the tightest budgets we've had since the Depression, and we're mindful of what's happened, and we're open to hear your concerns and open to the ideas that you presented about perhaps a meeting in the fall faculty staff event. Kind of off the radar scope, but big things that are going on. We are improving our processes. We touched on decision processes, and we're going to look at the legislative process and have a process improvement for that, kind of take lessons away. Also, the Vision 2030 continues. As I mentioned before, board members were roughly assigned to categories if you want to shift or add to, because obviously there's lots of areas we're studying, slightly more than there are board members, but please let me know about that. But we're making some really good progress on those breakout groups. The BACNU, the North Dakota Petroleum Council, has announced support us to get another scholarship, and several campuses here in the oil area of the state are doing that already. And we recognize the workforce is beginning to tighten, and there's going to be more skilled workforce needed, and we want to be responsive to that. With regard to our Nexus ND initiatives, some major progress on that. As you'll see, we're approving the campus-specific, or at least you'll come before you, the campus-specific Institute for Unmanned and Robotic or Autonomous Research. This area just continues to grow by leaps and bounds. I've actually been in discussions with the Department of Defense on 2 occasions. We'll probably be having the visit as early as June to discuss how we can help solve the problem of unmanned systems and security of infrastructure. And the Lieutenant Governor has asked a member from the higher ed system to co-chair a task force on this question, and I'll be able to hopefully come to the board on the 15th of May, explain where he wants to go with that. But big issues emerging there. Also in the cybersecurity area, as I mentioned, the policy ties into some initiatives here. We have been identified by WICHE and Homeland Security to be the first state that will hold a presidential level training session, tabletop exercise. We're tentatively scheduling that for the fall with our campus presidents to coincide with the suggestion that Dr. Mason had in our governance committee on how to improve governance. So I still a little bit thunder to have at least occasionally face-to-face meetings with the Chancellor's cabinet, being mindful of all their travel. We've done those by Ivan or phone, and we'll try to have a fall Chancellor's cabinet huddle where we'll do the training with Homeland Security and WICHE, as well as discuss improvements and other items on our agenda. Let's see, again, moving pretty quickly here. I do want to acknowledge the work of the foundations, the policy we worked on, but up here, I've met the foundation in Minot, does tremendous work supporting the school. The Williston Foundation is among the most generous in the country, reaching out across state lines to give scholarships to kids in Eastern Montana. And I recently attended an NDSU Foundation event. I want to thank them again for that invitation, but incredible group of alums loving the university, loving our state. Several of them talked about how they can help collaborate to help the whole state. It was from jeans to jackets to tuxedos at the event, and just realized that more the foundations can do will help our students. And so everything you've heard in the discussion is to the direction of just being sure that we are doing the best we can with that very important part. And then lastly, you'll be hearing from just two of the Chancellor's Cabinet studies, but the Chancellor Cabinet is also your arm for studying complex problems, because we don't have the money to hire many consultants. I know Chair Nessa will talk about at least some money's been given to us by the legislature. But you'll be hearing from two of them on our research study, which followed the mission study on two-year campuses, and also on governance. But the rest of them continue their work on attainment, retention, identifying new metrics, as well as tuition. We'll be resuming that in earnest once we know how the budget comes out, because obviously we've been given more latitude now on tuition, which is where we're going philosophically, give the campuses more latitude to adapt to unique conditions. So I want to thank all of them for what they're doing. So I may have missed some things there, but again, I want to thank everybody for their hard work. And with that, I'm open to any questions people might have.
Chancellor, thank you. Board members, any questions of the Chancellor and the work he is pursuing? Hearing none, we'll move along on board business. Agenda item number 7. I would like to present this. I'll refer the board members to the link on the campus study, provides you with the document, which is the contract and the budget for this issue. In summary, I'd like to just bring forward to you, this board is devoted to the students and to improvement of higher education in North Dakota on a system level. And this is going to be our mechanism to strengthen that position. This work was approved by the board back in our March meeting, March 30th. This is a board-led directive, and it is supported by the North Dakota legislature. So we welcome that support and funding. This will be input-driven. This will incorporate the Chancellor's Cabinet studies, the Workforce Education Advisory Council, which is WEAC, and the work that is ongoing by Envision 2030. We will elevate this work to the board level, and I want to assure everyone that this work is going to spread out. It is not just 2-year, it is going to be system-wide and will encompass the 4-year campuses as well. I want to be sure that everybody understands that all 11 institutions will maintain their current mission. This is very important to the work of this board. This is an effort to streamline administrative processes and build additional efficiencies system-wide. This is so that we can work to provide the needs of the workforce of North Dakota. This is not unique to North Dakota. Other states around the nation are doing similar work. We will begin the work. We will invite our South Dakota experts who will be coming in. They'll be coming into the state in May to begin this work. They will be doing a launch of this study beginning at our retreat in June in Bismarck. We'll look for board members to join the task forces and to assist with this. I'll now refer you to the contract. I'll just briefly review the guidelines that we are going forward with. We will meet with the board and the staff. So the South Dakota consultants will be meeting with us based on the requirements and the plan that was laid out in our March 30th meeting. We will the South Dakota group will lead a board retreat in June of 17. There will be an action plan reviewed at the board retreat. Task forces will be set up to address individual directives. The consultants will monitor the work of the task force. This work will take place from August of 17 through June of 2018. The consultants will provide bi-monthly counsel to the board, and eventually we will reach assistance in preparing the initial document for December of 2017, an interim report slated for April of 2018, and the final report of this work will be prepared for June of 2018, the work of the task force. At this point, I would welcome any questions that any board members may have, knowing that we will be engaging with this fully in the in the June retreat. Are there any questions or comments?
Madam Chair, just a couple of comments. This is Mike Ness.
Mike Ness, thank you.
I think we need to realize that we're working with consultants from South Dakota, and the intent is not to replicate the South Dakota system. I've heard that a couple of times, and these people are experts in dealing with being consultants, and that is why they are proposing this contract with us. We have some people who have experience working with them, so I think that's important. The other thing is, this is not an attack of any way on the two-year systems or any of our college systems. It's a way to look at efficiencies and sharing services. And that will be my intent as I work through this process, that we try to do those things and make our whole system better.
Thank you. Great highlights. Any other questions or concerns? Hearing none, thank you. That was information for the board. Agenda item number 8, NDSU nursing lease. We'll call on legal counsel, Mr. Nick Vaughn.
Madam Chair, no, you do not. Madam Chair, members of the board, again, stepping in for Dr. Feldner on this item. If you click on the link in the agenda, this amendment is to the lease agreement between NDSU and Sanford. Those are the two parties. I'm sure everyone's aware of the proposed House amendment that kind of initiated, I guess, a discussion between the legislature and Sanford, and this is what came out. The board is not, again, a party to the lease, except they're being asked to have read and acknowledged the lease. This lease basically extends the initial term of the $1 per year rent at the Bismarck, Sanford Bismarck NDSU location nursing school. What would be before you is just a motion to have read and acknowledge this lease and then direct the board secretary to sign, who is Tammy Dolan.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Board members, any questions or comments on this lease before us? Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, this is Kevin Milliker. I would move that we accept the lease as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Milliker. A second?
More, now second.
Thank you. Christy?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Dr. Milliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. And once again, our thanks to the legislature, Sanford, and NDSU for working through this lease agreement. Agenda item number 9, SBHE nomination. Tammy Dolan is not available to share this. Dr. Richard Rothaus, if you could share information for us.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This item is a nomination for Brian Lair. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, to be reappointed to the State Board of Agricultural Research and Education. He has been a member of SBHE since 2013. By policy, or actually by statute, the board was authorized to appoint members to SBHE. If these members, the nominations come from the Ag Coalition, which has 5 members, and the Extension Service multi-county program, which also has 5 board members. They have forwarded the name of Mr. Brian Lair to the board for approval. As I mentioned, Mr. Lair has already served on SBHE. He has expertise in crop and livestock agricultural production. He's worked in youth education, community development, has been very active in Emmons County, as is included in the attached documentation. This is an item the board would need to approve and confirm his position on SBHE.
Dr. Rathaus, thank you. Any questions or comments on this nomination? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve this?
Steeman, so moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Christie, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Morton? Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 10, change May board meeting date to May 15th. Chancellor Hagerott?
As, that was due to various conflicts board members had. So, you know, it does fall on the heels pretty quickly here, but fortuitously, it is early because, you know, we don't have the budget before you to brief in detail. We'd be able to do that. So it actually works quite well that within about 2 weeks of the budget, we hope is approved in the next few minutes, you'll be able to absorb the whole implications of what that means fairly quickly, which is nicely set up then for a retreat. So I would recommend to adopt that new date.
Okay, thank you. Council, Mr. Nick Vaughn, I see this as an action item. Do we need this as a motion and a vote?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I believe you do, just based on past practice. So I would go ahead and make that motion, or someone make that motion.
Thank you. Do we have a motion and a second to change the May board meeting to May 15th?
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, so moved. This Nick Evans.
I would second.
Thank you. Christie?
Could I have comment here, please?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes, I would like to see this as a face-to-face. We will have legislative review at that time, and Tammy or Lisa were not able to be here today, and the legislature's not done. That was part of the governance committee plan for board training, so if possible, I'd like to see face-to-face.
Thank you. With that request, I would recommend then that that meeting be held in Bismarck so that we can facilitate everybody to be present. Is there any further discussion or comments or requests? Okay. Mr. Vaughn, do we need that amended? Or is that adequate that we have this as requested as a date change and a face-to-face meeting in Bismarck?
Madam Chair, that's sufficient. The direction from both you and Member Ness is sufficient.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Further discussion? Hearing none. Christie?
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. We'll now move into our committee work, Budget and Finance Committee recommendations. Mr. Steeman is chair. However, he will defer to Mr. Hacker due to a little clearer communications here.
Sure. Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Steeman was having some connection issues. So I'll just kind of go through. We had 3 items that came before a Budget and Finance Committee meeting recently, a couple of weeks ago. And if you don't mind, we'll just go one by one. The first one is, and the committee recommended a approving this, which is the removal of 8 buildings at the University of North Dakota. This is a part of their master plan and long-term plan to improve space utilization and reduce future repairs and maintenance costs. This is a request for 8 of total of 13 buildings, which they are working through. 5 of these buildings are valued at less than $250,000 and 3 are at more than $250,000. Savings of this, once these are removed, will be about $1 million in operational savings per year and a reduction in $32 million of future repairs and maintenance. Your committee requested your guys' concurrence.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Any questions or comments from board members? Dr. Pining.
Yes. I'll just speak loudly. Can anybody tell me what is going to happen with the Women's Center at UND?
Madam Chair, I would defer to Rick Tonder if he's on the line.
Madam Chair, this is Rick Tonder. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm interested actually what happens to the Women's Center, and now I'm at it also with the International Center. Are they just moved around campus?
I'm sorry, I still have trouble.
Mr. Tonder. Dr. Pining, you come closer to the microphone here.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Thunder. Can you please explain what has happened with the Women's Center in the International Center at UND? Are they just moved around campus or are they completely gone?
It's my understanding, Dr. Pining, that they've been relocated, but I'll defer that to President Kennedy, who I was at the meeting.
Madam Chairman, Member Pining, this is Mark Kennedy. Both of those have already been relocated into our Memorial Union, which makes them in a more central location with all our other services and frankly more easily accessible to the students and those they serve.
President Kennedy, thank you. Dr. Pining says thank you. He appreciates that. Any further questions or discussion?
Kevin Melliker, I just want to thank the University of North Dakota for taking this approach. This came through the space utilization study, what, about a year ago maybe, or 9 months ago when we originally got the study. And as difficult as these decisions are, they are the right thing to do. And as we tighten our belts and become more efficient. So I'm all in favor of the motion.
We do. Thank you, Dr. Melliker. And yes, further discussion, and if none, we do need a motion to approve this.
I so move.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hacker, thank you. Christy, roll call vote.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item number 12. Mr. Hacker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is item number 12, which is the renaming of the School of Medicine. We have a beautiful new building just straight to the north of the old School of Medicine and Health Sciences. And there's now confusion on campus, as you can imagine. 2 buildings named with the same name. They would like to change the name to Columbia Hall. The purpose of the name is the old school and the new school, frankly, they adjoin Columbia Road. So it's a bit of a generic name. They are not going to spend very much money in signage, and they're going to put a skin over the old sign until they can find a more proper way to name the building, maybe with an owner, benefactor, or somebody that they want to remember. And so for now, it's just a name change. And so we ask that we change that to Columbia Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Any questions, or President Kennedy, if you have any comments?
As you know, this is perhaps only a temporary use building. We didn't want to have a name that would gain a lot of attachment to it since the long-term plan. We have not yet decided whether we're keeping this building, which is why we chose a very generic name.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Chair Nesson.
Hearing none?
Even I would
Yes,
move to approve the renaming of the building.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Morton, second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none. Christie?
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Agenda item 13, Mr. Hacker.
Madam Chair, this item is the use of $463,474 to use from the one-time pooled funding, which was in the prior legislative sessions, HB 1003, for use of for resources to pay for deferred maintenance, and those monies are available in the pool still, and they would like to use those at Lake Region State.
And the recommendation of
And
the committee?
recommendation of the committee is to approve that spending of those dollars.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion or questions? Do we have a motion to approve? Sorry, Mr. Steeman, was that a motion by you?
Yes, that was a motion to approve.
Thank you. Second? Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Christie, roll call.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Academic and Student Affairs Committee recommendations. We'll call on Mr. Morton.
Yes, item 14 is tenure. Each campus has submitted their list of faculty members for tenure. The respective presidents have approved this list. Our vice chancellor has reviewed the list. And that list, click on the tenures if you want to read that list. It's there. Any questions on tenure?
Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. This is Mike Ness.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Meliker.
Dr. Meliker. Christie?
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. We'll continue with Mr. Morton. However, you want to take items 15, 16, and 17 together or individually?
I'd love to take them together. Let me just give you a quick, item 15 is the OTD, a new program at OTD in occupational therapy. It will be delivered both on campus and via distance delivery. This has been, this is also a recommendation from the chancellor that this pass.
Any questions or discussion?
Any questions? Can I make them? Okay, let's go on to number 16. And to terminate, NSU is asking to terminate the College of University Studies. As I told our Academic Affairs Committee when we met, our current governor, Doug Bergman, is a proud graduate of the University Studies program at NDSU. As a football coach at NDSU, I love this program. It served us very well. it's time to move on, and this has a recommendation of the campus and of the committee to terminate this. Also, an organizational change at UND to create the Institute for Unmanned and Autonomous Research. Again, our committee had a good discussion and approved this. Number 17 is program terminations at Dixon State University. And again, we had good discussions and approved this, and the chancellor also supports this. So I would entertain if there's any. Are there any questions on items 15, 16, or 17?
We do, Mr. Morton. I'll call on the chancellor first.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and Member Morton. Just a comment on the Institute for Unmanned Autonomous Research. That is the campus-specific program, but as you recall, under Nexus ND, it's the intersection of unmanned systems, data analytics, and cybersecurity that the state board, and I discussed this with President Kennedy, had a wonderful faculty-wide session on integrating all things related to robotics, unmanned, aviation, and I was allowed to speak briefly, that the state board will still be the final authority of this emerging field of research to promote collaboration. And my intention, I'll be working with our lawyers to bring an instrument to designate UND and their institute as the executive agent for unmanned research, but NDSU in like a deputy type of position, Lake Region has these various programs. So we continue to collaborate, but this is a very good step internally to the campus so they can have basically more collaboration within the campus, but this does not suspend the state board's authority to enhance collaboration in this very, very emerging field. And also NDSU is doing incredible work on cybersecurity, and fully anticipate that I would ask the same, that they would become the state lead integrator center for cybersecurity, but that's going to take a little longer. They're in discussions with NSA right now on what they need to meet certifications, but that's just to reassure anybody that we're not fragmenting here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hacker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and maybe the Chancellor can answer this, and possibly Nick Vaughn. In 2010, there was a private company launched in Grand Forks. It's a North Dakota drone company, and there's starting to be lots of these. And it has a very, very similar name to what they're trying to name the Institute. And there is concern, and they're beginning to look into hiring legal counsel about the conflicting use of that name. And so I think this is a great program. It's really exciting. Just want to make sure we're checking the boxes, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. That name of that company, I don't know if I really want to, it's called Unmanned Applications Institute. It's very close to what this is being called. I know that the company did meet with UND, and so I'm curious to know if some resolution was found in what the exact terminology, or if we have any risk at all as a system between using a name that's so similar to another one that's already been founded.
Well, I'll defer to President Kennedy if he has any thoughts. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but you know, a university research full of faculty versus a private company, I would think there could be a way to work that out. But President Kennedy, do you have any other observations about that?
This is the first I've heard of it. I'm happy to check it out, and I'm happy to seek legal counsel as to whether the overlap in words is sufficient for anyone to be concerned.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn, any input?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd follow up with what President Kennedy said. I'm not aware of anything, but certainly there's counsel at UND who would either be aware of it or could handle the request through President Kennedy.
Thank you. Any further?
No, thanks, ma'am.
Okay. I would just like to go back to Mr. Morton on item number 17 with DSU business programs. Is Dr. Mitchell on the line? And
Dr. Mitchell is traveling to the Lumina, so I think Dr. Carmen is on the line. So
okay. I just want to know if there are any, Mr. Morton, were there any comments or such through DSU on item number 17 with the program terminations?
Yes, it'd be great to have comments from DSU. Basically, the programs, the different disciplines are still being taught. They're being taught in different parts of the university. They're still going to have banking and finance. This is more of a reorganizational approach.
Thank you.
The curriculum, there's still going to be curriculum around these different topics.
Madam Chair, this is Kevin Milliker. I had a question about the termination of the major in biology and what effect that possibly could have on preventing pre-professional students from applying at Dickinson State University. And I don't know if they have additional coursework or additional classes that make that up, but I know a lot of pre-professional students certainly use biology and chemistry as their ticket into professional schools. So I just want to make sure, especially with that section of the state, that we are not eliminating the opportunity that we would have to attract professionals back into that area.
Madam Chair, this is Richard Rothus. If Dickinson State is not on the line, I can respond to the questions.
I would like to ask, is anybody from Dickinson State on the telephone line? Dr. Rothaus, could you then step in and answer these questions for us?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And I know Dr. Wilson was on the line at Dickinson State, so I'm not quite sure what happened. On the business programs, all of these are minors. The courses will still be offered as electives. So a student who is majoring in business and has an interest in, for example, human resource management, will still be able to take those courses as an elective. It simply will not appear as a minor. These minors were inactivated in 2014 and do not have any students in them. At the moment, this is part of a cleanup of the number of majors and minors being offered at the institution. When an institution is reviewed by the Higher Learning Commission for accreditation, one of the things they check is how many majors and minors are you offering, and is that realistic given the size that you are? So all of our institutions periodically will go through and do some cleanup. These things tend to grow and have to be trimmed back like so many things in life. So this should not affect the actual educational opportunities of any student in business. In the natural sciences, this is a similar situation. The Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Health Biology with a professional option and biology with the wildlife biology option are being eliminated. They've been inactive since 2014. There are no students in them currently. What Dickinson is maintaining is the Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health and then a Bachelor of Science in General Biology. So if, for example, your plan was to be a wildlife biologist, and they have very strong faculty in that area at Dickinson State, your degree would be in general biology, and you would then focus your course choices in your elective course choices in the area of wildlife. So from the student perspective, this will go unnoticed.
Okay, Dr. Rothaus, can you still hear us at Minot State?
Madam Chair, yes, we can.
Can you see us?
Yes, we can.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Dr. Milliker, did Dr. Rothaus answer your questions?
You know, and Madam Chair, he did to a certain extent. So it's my understanding that the major in biology, the professional option, still exists through a BS degree, but does not exist through a BA degree with this change. Is that correct?
Hi, this is Carmen at Dickinson. Can you hear me now? Audio on silent.
Yes, we can, Carmen.
Sorry, I was connected through my computer and for some reason I couldn't get the audio in. Rich explained it extremely well. All of these have been inactive for 3 years. There are no students in them. It has not impacted our enrollment in any way or the opportunities for students to engage in pre-professional programs, especially in the sciences. And as Rich said, it was based on our accreditation review and suggestion that we try to streamline and become more efficient in our offerings.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions now that we have Dickinson State on the line? Mr. Morton?
Hearing none, can we call for, can we get a motion for, on item 16, 15, 16, and 17?
Madam Chair, I'll move 15, 16, and 17. This is Nick Hacker.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second?
Kevin Milliker, second.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, this is Mike Ness. 16B, do we need that resolved before we take a vote on that? Do we need a table B?
Mr. Vaughn, I'll defer to you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, not knowing the specifics, I would think that you could approve it, and if we needed to come back with a renaming of the institute, we could do that based on whatever issue there was. So I don't think it needs to be tabled, but certainly if the board felt that way, they could do that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ness, is that adequate that we will conclude this in the motion and adjust as needed legally?
Well, I'd like to see it tabled. Dr. Kennedy, President Kennedy had not really heard about the issue, and I think in a couple of weeks here that could be resolved, and I'd like to come back on May 15th and talk about it. So I'd make a motion to table 16B.
Thank you. Do we have a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you. Christy, roll call?
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Milliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. That was a vote on the table of item 16B. Mr. Vaughn, refresh my memory. Do we have a motion on the table to approve 15, 16, and 17?
Madam Chair, yes, you do. And the way we would take that procedurally was Mr. Ness's motion was an amendment to the original motion. So what you would be voting on now is to essentially pass everything that was originally moved except 16B, which is now tabled.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Christy, call a vote.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Milliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. And I would ask if we can bring this back on the May 15th meeting agenda. We'll move on the agenda, Governance Committee recommendation. Mr. Ness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give a report on the Governance Committee meeting we had on April 20th. We have one action item, and that was sent out in the link. If you would pull that up and take a look at that, it's called orientation. And thank you to Dr. Mason and Christy for working on this. They did a lot of work on this, really dug into it, and really have a framework for us to use as our orientation plan. And we hope to have this in place in the next couple of months before our new members come on. I'm not going to go through it in detail. If you have any questions on any of the items, any of the other board members, Nick or Kevin, if you have comments you'd like to make, we can do that, or any questions that anyone has related to the orientation.
Mr. Hacker, any questions? The other board or the other committee member?
Dr. Malker, he was not able to be there, but he has reviewed the information.
I don't have any questions either.
Thank you. I find this, Dr. Mason, I'll say thank you to you for your input on this. This is looks like a very comprehensive and a well-planned outline for us. Chancellor?
Yeah, I just want to, thank you, Madam Chair, thank Member Ness, Hacker, and Melliker. These have actually been long meetings, detailed, and thank Dr. Mason and the Chancellor's Cabinet for this. It came out of Chancellor's Cabinet with Mr. Ness was a State Board members on that to build a governance committee. But the overriding goal here is that new members can come on, feel comfortable with the process and the knowledge, so then we can tap their wisdom. Because as Member Wakeford shared, part of it is just this is very unknown terrain to faculty members, staff members, maybe a student, and then we go maybe 6 months with tentative wisdom offered up because they're not sure exactly the knowledge. So I just want to thank them for this, and we're trying to be very innovative with using technology. We may make a series of video clips so that we can tailor the orientation and training depending on a board member. If someone's been on many, many boards like Member Ness, he doesn't need to see a whole bunch of things about Robert's rules and whatnot. But thank you again for the work. A lot of deliberation and effort went into this.
Thank you, Chancellor. Any other comments?
Madam Chair, this is Nick Evans. If I might, not to sound too repetitive here, but if I can echo the Chancellor's sentiment. As the one voting member of this board who has a one-year term, I can definitely speak to the value of orientation, and I think this is fantastic. And I would echo the sentiments of Member Wakeford as well, that as coming on, a more comprehensive orientation would be very beneficial for especially the board members of the one-year term. So I think this is great, and I want to thank everyone involved with this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. We appreciate your comments. Mr. Ness, any further comments on this?
Madam Chair, this is intended to be a working document that we would see how it goes this year and make changes as needed. Legal counsel does say that we should make a motion to accept this. We came out of committee with this recommendation, so if that's appropriate, I'd make that motion.
Thank you very much. Second?
Second.
Mr. Hacker, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Christy?
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Mr. Ness will continue with an update from governance.
We have a number of items that we are working on, but nothing for action at this time, and we hope to meet before the meeting on the 15th to bring some of these forward. One that I talked about briefly was the board training, and we will have the legislative review at our May meeting with Lisa and Tammy. Board self-evaluation, we spent a lot of time on this, have some documents that we're working on, and we're working on two portions of this. One is an individual self-reflection that I think we were pretty comfortable with, and that would go to board members maybe midway through the year, just to see how they feel about what they are doing as a board member, and it would not go anywhere beyond that unless they wanted to talk to the chair or any of the system staff, so that would be a self-reflection. The other would be a board evaluation that would be used by the governance committee to look at changes and ways that we can improve the whole system. And this became a little bit more complex, and we'll come back with some ideas, hopefully at the May meeting, to get this done. We'd like to do this in June to see how board members felt things went this year and what changes we could make in our coming year, but we'll work on that, like I said. The Chancellor and President evaluation process, we spent a lot of time on that along with the President's contracts, and we really think we probably need to move this forward at the June retreat and talk about the contracts and what type of review system we should have in place, and the Chancellor has some great ideas on how to make some changes here. It would take board action. It would change the system that we have right now. He is in the process of doing president reviews at this time and has to do all 11 of them, and will present those to us. And the system that we're proposing, or that he is working on us with us on, would split this probably into 6 and 5 at different times during the year, so they're not all coming forth at the same time. So we will work on that, and hopefully we can bring that back to the retreat in June. And I think that is about it, unless any of the other board members would like to bring up anything that we talked about.
Thank you, Mr. Ness. Further discussion on governance committee updates? Okay, thank you. Appreciate the work you're doing. System reports, agenda item number 20, our strategic plan, goal 4. We'll call on Chancellor Hagerott and Mr. Ryan Jockers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And because of connectivity here, I'm going to ask Ryan, if he can, to bring up the front page. Yeah, right there. If you'd hold there for a second. We just lost the screen. Maybe it's coming back here. So if we could start with just the NDUS Edge with the 4 goals there. And could I ask, okay, we see it now. All right. So we've talked through 3 of those, just to bring people back again to frame the discussion. You established a strategy several years ago with 4 different areas. I use a simple memory device, system, S, excellent education, and then accessible and affordable. We use numbers there. So we may think about a mnemonic for memory devices so you don't have to try to memorize which is which goal, which one are we on. But the one we're talking about today is goal 4. And I would say for the board, it's probably the one that is most directed at a board and a system office, because on the other ones, we rely on faculty to understand what students need to learn in physics and adapt that. We have CFOs at each campus trying to control costs and watching their budgets very carefully, because we have a very autonomous system. As you know, people have to go to the bond markets by campus, where some systems where they can just keep going overrun and the legislature bail them out. We know that doesn't happen here. But when it comes to the system, I would say the state board are system builders, and getting into this, the discussion will mainly be what metrics are there, and the thought that this is really something we should develop into yet greater visibility. But I would acknowledge for the faculty members and others that old saying that, and sometimes Einstein's given credit for it, but what's the saying, that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. We recognize that. You meeting with a student and being the one who actually keeps them in class because they know you care for them, we know that's very hard, if not impossible to measure. But when it comes to metrics on shared services, efficiencies, transferability credits, we can start to see patterns. So if you can, Ryan, go ahead and flick to goal 4 and some of the subsets there. Okay. So the metrics that you came up with under goal 4 is a system. Again, you as system builders trying to integrate. And I can just tell you one thing is that already North Dakota is so far ahead on kind of the intangibles. I was just having a discussion with a chancellor in another state, and 3 of the big universities won't even talk to each other, basically. And it may become a governor policy that no program is developed unless it's collaborative. And that also is the case in Ohio. Governor Kasich there just had enough of a lack of collaboration that any new program must be collaborative. Well, we are well ahead of that. So I just want to preface that in many cases, our system is functioning at among the highest level. A statistic that Jennifer Weber found for me, that we are #1 in the nation in the ability and the willingness of students to transfer between state institutions or across state lines, or Canadians coming down here. So clearly the ability of thinking beyond just a campus, we are by that measure #1 in the nation. So we have counselors and teachers encouraging students to find what course fits best. Also, we are #1 in our region on 2-year students moving into 4 years and successfully graduating. So on some big numbers, we are doing pretty well, but there's other areas we definitely need to improve on. So if you look on first one, Ryan, 4.1, increased collaboration among institutions. That is an explicit goal of the board, and the numbers look down, but if you see there could be a pattern. This is where more robust statistical analysis in, I think, 3 of the 4 sets of the years, the fall is always higher than the spring. So we could have this step down from 1,500 to 1,391, could be a fall spring dynamic. But also I can tell you, we want more transparency on what exactly are the collaborative numbers built out of, and we can fill that out. But that's the rough numbers you see there, collaborative programs, but they're not normalized for numbers of campus initiatives that could be in work, because it could take several years on that. And Nexus ND would be an example of that. When that comes through, the collaborative numbers are going to jump pretty significantly in cyber and unmanned systems. So there's one metric that you've adopted. You can go to 4.2, efficiencies through the system. And I think this becomes a focus on the study that Chair Ness had introduced, is what are we doing to share services across the system? And Ryan, if you can just click on there, you can see from 2014, the number of shared services to 2015 to 2016, some movement. But again, more fidelity or granularity on, what would be the financial savings, best estimate would that be? What would be the size of the collaborative programs? So again, these are just coarse numbers for you, generally moving in a positive direction. But this is where I think a lot of our work can focus on giving you more specifics when we can put dollar numbers to shared services. If you can go back, Ryan, to 4.3, this is an interesting one. Adaptiveness of the system. And we have several business people on our board, and Chair Nessett, incredible, she's been through, I don't know how many oil downturns, and her company adapted and grew, and there are many, many companies that didn't. So I would say this may be, one of the most important is the system's ability to respond quickly to changing needs. This could be changing students, how they're changing. For example, we have at the system office a committee led by Katie Fitzsimmons on substance abuse for students. Well, this is becoming a national crisis. How quickly do we adapt? It'd be great to measure if other states' school systems start to have statistics of addiction, opiate overdoses, and we don't. It'd be a sign of how we adapted to this and got ahead of it. But this is basically using an indicator of just policies. But I could see again that as we study the system, what could be indicators of the adaptability of the system to changing students? I would say right now, a great indicator I would love to have on here is the ability to adapt to changing fiscal environment. My hat's off to the faculty, staff, and the presidents. Huge shock to the system that made the Wall Street Journal article last week. And students are getting out on time, they're getting the credentials, they're passing their certifications. To me, that would be a really all-star performance of adapting to unprecedented financial shifts and still maintain programs. But again, that's what you have, and you can see substantial work has been done on policies, numerous ones since you adopted this strategy. But again, other metrics could fill out in here. And then last one, this is one that you'll get more briefed here in a minute by Dr. Scogan, who's leading the Chancellor's Cabinet study on research. We are devoted in our state to diversifying the economy. We heard this from Senator Heitkamp on the Vision Kickoff, is that we're not going to diversify the economy through discovering a diamond mine somewhere or discovering untapped millions of acres. We're going to diversify the economy through business, research, and the university system is front and center with that. So maybe even this objective, I think, could almost slide into under goal 3, excellence, equipping for the future rather than a system thing, because we have 2 research universities, and it in some ways maybe kind of misaligned the end of this one. But again, some basic statistics there. You'll get some updated ones here from Dr. Scogan, but we're working on getting better metrics for you, and I'll leave that to Dr. Scogan to tell you about that. So again, I think this is, goal 4 is a crucial one for board members in my office, because we again defer to the campuses, for example, the cybersecurity experts, Bismarck State, Minot, and NDSU to create that knowledge, create those courses. We want to give them encouragement, but they're doing it there. But this is something that centers much more strongly with the board and our business acumen on the board. So are there any questions for me? And then Ryan will show how that feeds into the next step of tracking that performance with SPOL.
Thank you, Chancellor. We'll now go to any questions or comments for the Chancellor? Mr. Jockers, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, and the Chancellor. PowerPoint is apparently restarting. So I'm going to restart that and we'll continue. Great timing, by the way.
Well,
That's okay.
Madam Chair, while he's just to brag a little bit about what some of your college presidents, system staff, and you yourselves have been championing. Lisa Johnson printed this out for me in case there was discussion to give us some examples of what we're doing that may not be captured in the system as metrics. For example, that in the last 2 years achieved a much higher level commonly numbered courses, transferable gender education coursework, reverse transfer initiative came under your tenure, Madam Chair, several state-to-state agreements. Again, the thought if our students need something across the border, that we help them with that. Articulation agreements in childhood education, nursing, agriculture, dual credit, e-transcripts. So a lot of just hard work happening that may not be captured in those metrics yet.
Thank you.
And there's Ryan's PowerPoint.
Jockers?
Thank you. I'm ready now. Thank you. So kind of just feeding off what the Chancellor talked about, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples that we can show our system maximizing and utilizing our efficiencies and resources to accomplish our goals. But what I want to do is provide a strategic update and kind of bundle that in and not make it just, president evaluations, but make it this is a planning process. And as we engage our strategic plan, we engage our campuses, we're going to find so much that we can leverage for opportunity, and that will be the second part of the presentation, walking through a tangible example of connecting the dots and being able to open up the door for all of our universities to be involved. So to begin, our planning process and president evaluations, as we've discussed a little bit so far, is on time. We're making some refinements to make that easier for everyone to understand the activity, the tracking of how we're doing under these goals. And again, that is a slow process with 11 institutions, but little by little, once we get that moving, I feel that we are going to be in the right direction. And I just want to emphasize that as we go through this process, as that arrow graph shows, where we go from the NDOS goal to the campus, to the presidents, and then to the metric, aligning ourselves under this is incredibly important, especially when you have, as we discussed before, 11 institutions doing this at once. We will miss things if we cannot do this accurately, and we will miss opportunities and synergies if we cannot do this accurately. So I think that's where our emphasis really is this time around. And then when we go to the new method, as mentioned by Member Ness, hopefully we can even create more efficiencies in that respect and more time dedicated to these initiatives and how they are doing. Another part of this strategic update, I wanted to kind of align with this idea of a shared service or maximizing our system with an update from the work I'm doing with the Dakota Nursing Program. As many of you know, it's made up of a nursing education consortium between Bismarck, Lake Region, Bottineau, and Williston. And again, that is, there's a lot going on there. And what they're doing, and I've been working with the director, Julie Traynor, heavily on this, is taking their entire assessment processes between the 4 schools and placing it in our strategic planning environment, which means everything will be coordinated, reported, and tracked in one place for that program. And again, what that does is opens doors. So it may fit a need in that respect, but what it does is opens doors to your planning processes and accreditation. So now all 4 of those universities can tie their planning directly to this assessment. And again, that's just one example, but this shows the capability and potential for collaboration and the ease of collaboration to provide a holistic strategic planning environment, which is our end goal. And lastly, that the training and full implementation will be by the end of May. So we will be training in the next couple weeks, and all of their assessments will start going in the spring, and there will be it's hard to explain the complexity and detail that's being done, but the end result will be very beneficial to these schools and to the Dakota Nursing Program. And I hope that's a good example for the rest of the institutions. Secondly, I just wanted to go through that process I talked about. Here is I guess you want to call it a case study or an example of how we can take the environment of our state and then we can use our NDOS goals, the goals of the institution, and then initiatives of the president to strengthen the unified system. So to start out, the need around Williams County and Williston and the region has shown that there is just less opportunity compared to the rest of the state. And I'm not going to get into that and what that entails, but we're going to focus on the lack of access to a four-year university in that region. And recent economic data has strengthened this intuition. I'm not going to get into that now, but that is kind of the need that we've seen in that area. So where does that come into play? Well, in Goal 2, we want to provide programs people want and where they need them. So that's where that starts out. And then Williston State College goal is to offer enhanced and quality services to support student learning and community involvement. So we're starting out with the need. We have some goals that can help drive some initiatives. So here's the initial opportunity. So as many of you already know, the Williams County Scholarship has been in place for a couple years now, but now that is expanding. It's expanding to not only counties surrounding Williams County in North Dakota, but also in Montana starting this fall. So here we have an initiative of initial opportunity. And if we just stopped here, that would be great. I think everyone would agree that is a great opportunity to provide access of education to people that may not have it. But again, if we just stop there, we're really missing the synergies of the unified system. And this is where we can move forward. So if you see that orange arrow on the left, that is our goal 2. That's that first initial opportunity. But what we can do is move that to goal 4 and maximizing the system, going from one institution to affect almost 5 or 6 institutions. And I'll show you where that comes into play. So again, the question is, how do we link that opportunity between Goal 2 and Goal 4? Well, another initiative that Williston is doing is to create agreements with Valley City, Minot, Mayville, and Dickinson. And more detail of that is 2+2 programs. What that does is provide streamlined curriculum for specific programs students want to go into onto the four-year university. So what does that do? That addresses the need of accessing a four-year NDOS university. So we go from the initial need of just getting education and opportunity to begin with, and now we're able to expand that, maximize our strengths, and access four-year universities, where the first 2 years being completely almost free. So again, that's just a small example. There are dozens and dozens more of those synergistic opportunities we can identify using this process, and as we further and evolve our processes and efficiencies to get better at what we're doing. That's all I have. Is there any feedback or questions?
Mr. Jockers, thank you very much. I'd like to follow up with one question. I mean, I'm so impressed with this work. I like your example with Williston State and the 2+2 programs with Dr. John Miller. Dr. Miller, do you have any comments on this?
Thank you, Chair Nesset. Actually, our biggest takeaway, it's been very positive with our four-year sister institutions, is that they understand what our need is with the 2+2 program, which is really, excuse me, a continuation from the associates to the bachelor's degree, but the ability for the students to stay here regionally and us to keep our young talent here. And so I've been very gratified working with my colleagues in the other institutions that they get that, and they're trying their very best to provide distance and video conference alternatives, and even in some cases alternative scheduling, so our students can actually stay in the Williams County and the surrounding counties, and then also continue their education.
Dr. Miller, thank you, and I'll take this opportunity from the board, just from the board to recognize once again, there are few places in this country that can say that the first 2 years of your college education are essentially free. And that is thanks to the Williston State College Foundation and the Alva J. Field Scholarship Program. Very impressive. Board, are there any other?
Madam Chair, I would just add, I know very firsthand, actually, a student that's, she's my girlfriend. She graduated from Williston State College with her associate's degree, and she's, they have a counselor right there in Williston, and she engaged with them, and she's completing her baccalaureate degree through Mayville State. It's a prime example of exactly what's being discussed here. So very successful.
So 2 years at Williston State, staying there and getting her degree from Mayville while on campus at Williston State campus.
Yes. Yep.
That's impressive. Chancellor?
Madam Chair, just a moment of levity. I see that maybe John Miller is already celebrating. I like how you're doing your board meeting there. That kind of relaxed view there in the chair, but news just came in, our budget did just pass. So if that's why you're relaxing and loosening the tie, we all should be doing that. But Tammy Dolan just texted me, and so we got through. So,
Chancellor, thank you. I hope everybody heard that. Wonderful news. And thank you to our legislature. We will acknowledge all their hard work on behalf of higher education in the state. Any further discussion or questions for Mr. Jockers or for the Chancellor? Okay, hearing none, we will continue with our reports, system reports. Agenda item 21, we'll call Enterprise Risk Management, Laura Schratt.
One second, they're going to help me.
Okay, thank you, Laura. We'll give you some time here.
Here we go. All right, I think we're up. Okay, good morning. I think it's still morning. Madam Chair and members of the board. For the record, my name is Laura Schratt, and I am the NDUS Director of Audit Services. Today, I will expand on the introduction of enterprise risk management, which was introduced at the last board meeting. Enterprise risk management is meant to assist institutions as they look at key risks to their objectives, assess and prioritize those risks, and determine the proper course of action based on existing controls and limited resources. Mainly, enterprise risk management is a process to assist with strategy setting, which provides reasonable assurance that the entity will achieve its objectives. Or simply stated, enterprise risk management is a process by which the major risks facing an organization's strategic goals are identified and evaluated. Why is enterprise risk management important to NDUS? Like organizations within the private sector, the university system and each of our institutions operates in an inherently risky environment. Many types of risk exist: financial risk, operating risk, strategic risk, regulatory risk, environmental risk, reputational risk, political risk, to name a few. Managing this portfolio of risks is important to help ensure that NDUS institutions can continue to serve the students, faculty, and staff of our system. It can reduce the chance of loss and help ensure that scarce resources are directed to the risks that matter most. Finally, the State Auditor's Office has recommended for a number of years that NDUS completes a risk assessment. It is a priority of the SBHE Audit Committee that we work to implement this recommendation. Additionally, the legislature passed House Bill 1173, which goes into effect August 1st of 2017. This gives the Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee the authority to recommend reductions to state appropriations for those entities that do not correct audit findings within 2 biennia. The Fraud, Risk, and Internal Control Assessment has been a recommendation since 2008. What is the basis for enterprise risk management? COSO, which stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, has developed an ERM framework, which is represented in the cube to the right, and consists of 8 components. It is based off the original COSO internal control cube with 5 components on the left.
While there are other enterprise risk management frameworks that can be utilized, the COSO ERM Cube is widely used in the United States and will be the basis for the NDUS approach. The 8 components of the COSO ERM Cube can be visualized in a continuous cycle. The ERM Introduction and Application Guide, which has been provided to all campuses, has detailed explanations including examples, tables, and illustrations for each of the 8 components. But briefly today, it starts with the internal environment, the yellow circle, which sets the tone for the organization. Commitment from the board and senior management is key. Next is objective setting, the orange circle, which is the institutional and system-wide strategic planning, including Vision 2030, where organizational goals are set. Next, event identification, the red circle, where the risk to the organizational goals are identified. Then, risk assessment, the green circle, where institutions review and assess the risks identified earlier. What is the impact if something happens? What is the likelihood that something will happen? Next, risk response, the purple circle, where institutions review the assessed risks and determine what response is appropriate. Avoid the risk, reduce the risk, accept the risk, monitor it, or transfer the risk. Control activities, the light blue circle is next, where the institutions determine the existing controls and identify where weaknesses may exist, and depending upon the chosen risk response, determine the need for additional action. Information and communication, the dark blue circle, is ensuring that responsibility for risk as well as status of ongoing efforts are communicated both to management and staff affected by the actions. Monitoring, the black circle, means keeping an eye on risk management activities and modifying as necessary. Unmonitored controls tend to deteriorate over time, so board and senior management commitment to ongoing review is essential. ERM can be an incredibly complex undertaking with entire departments, even companies, dedicated solely to enterprise risk management. As an organization that is just beginning the formalized ERM approach, the goal is to get started. It is important to note that NDUS approach will have at its core a component of simplicity. We are going to start simply. Success of the ERM process will depend on many factors, but the most important is the tone at the top. The board and senior management must be committed to this process. Additionally, as we begin the ERM process, it is important to keep it simple. It can always be enhanced as the process matures. At each institution, it is important to have an ERM champion, someone that will keep on top of ERM process and keep it moving forward. Once risks are identified and risk management details are determined, it is important to make sure that individuals identified to work on certain processes or controls are aware of their responsibility. Lastly, communication. Risk owners and others who may be affected by any process, changes, or enhancements should be made aware of the reasons and how this will work to reduce risk, the timelines, and status updates. What needs to be done? This slide highlights deliverables throughout the ERM process, starting now and including interim deadlines. The cycle begins again in April of 2018. There are 2 key institutional deliverables by June 30th of 2017, and those are the risk identification and risk assessment. Risk identification, this is due by May 12th of 2017. Each institution will designate an ERM coordinator to facilitate the ERM process, and utilizing work groups, discussions, surveys, or other means, a small group of senior institutional leaders will identify no more than 10 to 15 top risks to the institution's objectives, goals, and/or strategic plan. NDUS Audit Services distributed tools to be used to help identify risks, the institution's specific 2011 Larson-Allen Risk Assessment, and the Association of College and University Auditors Higher Education Risk Dictionary. This step is the driver of the remainder of the ERM process and will require dedicated time. As an update, the ERM process was rolled out to institutional presidents at the April 12th cabinet meeting. Many institutions have identified their ERM coordinator and begun the risk identification process, and one campus has already completed this first step. Risk assessment. This is due by June 2nd of 2017. NDUS Audit Services will utilize the key risks identified by each institution to produce an institution-specific anonymous Qualtrics survey. The institutional group that worked to identify the key risks will identify additional stakeholders to assess each risk. These should be functional leaders who have knowledge of the risk areas. The survey will be sent to both groups. The survey will ask the respondent to assess the impact and likelihood of each risk utilizing a 4-point scale. This should take a minimal amount of institutional time. After June 30th of 2017, once the risk identification and risk assessment work has been completed and the priority risks identified, it is time to determine what to do and start working through the ERM cycle explained earlier. Each risk will need to have a response assigned to it. The institution can either avoid, accept, reduce, or transfer the risk. This decision will be a function of the institution's risk appetite, the calculated risk score, which will be provided via the survey results, as well as available resources. Next will be the process of identifying the controls that currently exist, as well as new controls that will need to be implemented. After that, it is a matter of keeping stakeholders informed, communicating results, and monitoring the progress. As previously noted, the ERM cycle will begin again in April of 2018. In conclusion, to be effective and sustainable, the ERM process needs to be simple, practical, and easy to understand. ERM is done right when leaders at every level use this information to make decisions. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Ms. Schratt, thank you very much. Excellent presentation, and this is just crucial to the board to continue this work with you. Board members, any questions, discussion? Thank you, Ms. Schratt. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You bet. Agenda item number 22, Chancellor's Studies Update.
Madam Chair, if I could, we have several studies going on, and many have yielded things already. We just, in the interest of time, only have two. But of course, as I mentioned, the Governance Chancellor's Cabinet had the outcome of the Governance Board Committee. Administrative cost study, you received a report earlier. The mission study had completed last year. Tuition policy, which was on track, but we probably have to adjust that. The shared services resulted in several good foundation probably for what we're going to have coming up. And of course, the retention and attainment, which is where Dr. Mitchell is today, down at Lumina Foundation. And then most recently, Dr. Bashani leading the K-12 integration of how to transition. But another thing, just to applaud the board and work with the WEAC study, which was given to the Higher Education Board. I just received word yesterday, will be used by the governor, and he will attend the Governor's Workforce Development Council on the 24th of May, and that will be the document that works from. So again, one of those things that your work doesn't go, sometimes there's studies that sit on the shelf, that is true, there's some, but in this case, the work that was done from the WEAC study, which this board oversaw with Dr. Rothfuss being the point man, will be the foundation for that meeting with the governor on the 24th. So the only two studies we'll highlight here are research and governance. If Dr. Mason's voice can't hold up, I know she's been under the weather, then Dr. Scogan, who's also on that committee in the deputy role. So go ahead, who's ready to kick off? Dr. Scogan, can we start with you? Did we just move video?
Bismarck, do you hear Minot State?
We do.
Thank you.
Madam
Dr.
Chair,
Scogan?
members of the board, yeah, I was sitting there waiting for Tisa to kick in with her governance, but I will go ahead with the research thing. About 2 years ago, Chancellor asked me to run a task force study on mission, and the first part of it had to do with the workforce, and I felt pretty comfortable with that, and we went ahead and we did our workforce study, and I briefed that to you earlier this year. Then the Chancellor suggested that we do a phase 2, and that is to move into research itself. So this is mission study phase 2 of research. I will begin by saying I'm a community college president, and so I've been dealing with terms and so forth that have been a little bit foreign to me in how this happens at the research institutions. But nevertheless, in speaking to the chancellor about how we would go about this, the first thing that we agreed upon is that it's impossible to move forward on something that's this huge for the state without at least having sort of a rudimentary understanding of where we are with research. So this first thing that I'm going to brief you on today and the update I'll give you is just sort of a snapshot of where we are in the state relative to graduate study and to research in the state. Before I start talking about this, let me say as the board decides to move forward on this project at some point, there's the realization that research is really, really individual to the campus, to the institution, as well as to the individuals that are on that institution. So if you have a researcher that has a passion for something and has won the Nobel Peace Prize, or excuse me, the Nobel Prize for Physics, and you bring them to your campus, that's probably what they're going to do their research on. And so as faculty are hired at the research institutions, that's going to be the expertise. And of course, you can direct your money in that direction if you want. But nevertheless, we'll just take a look at the snapshot that we came up with. So first I want to give many, many thanks for this and a caveat on it. But the folks involved, there were many folks involved in this, but especially Ellie and Ryan. I thank them very much because they're the ones that came up with all these slides that we're going to see, as well as the survey we're going to talk about. And they provided the real IR expert to putting us all together. But it would have been impossible without Grant and Kelly at UND and NDSU helping. They helped us define some of the parameters, helped us define some of the terms that we would be using, and they're just instrumental in the surveys that we did and so forth. So I really thank Presidents Kelly and Bershani for the use of Grant and Kelly as we move forward on this. And then all of the presidents have been supportive in getting the surveys out and getting their campuses to respond and so forth. So thanks to all those folks. The big caveat is that this is simply a snapshot. This is a first time through. It's the first time through on any sort of comprehensive picture of graduate and creative activities that we have across the NDUS. We have many pictures institutionally, but to try to bring all that together and collect it all together into one snapshot for NDUS is what this was all about. There are basically two types of data that we looked at here. One is the publicly sourced data, and that's the stuff anybody can go out and collect and put together in a slide and present. That's the easy stuff. The harder stuff is the self-reported thing. And so when we're talking about creative activities, these are self-reported, and I'll be giving some caveats about that when we get into that. But the first thing we're going to look at are the publicly sourced Carnegie classification we use, the IPEDS, the NSF, and then in some cases the institutions provided the most current data because they're not yet publicly available, but they will be because there's always a time lag between when stuff is actually done and when it becomes publicly available. So to begin with, master's degrees conferred across NDUS, you should see the numbers there. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and I know all of you got a copy of this morning, so if you wanted to peruse it more closely. I will say about master's degrees is recently the board has approved the granting of MATs by Mayville and Dickinson, and so as you move down in the future, you're going to have more master degrees conferred if you include those other institutions as well. And then doctoral degrees that have been conferred, and it shows you the breakdown between the different types of degrees in professional fields or the arts and sciences and humanities. And then this breaks down, and it probably looks like a reading eye chart here. I don't know if you can read that, but it shows you all the different areas that graduate level degrees are granted within the state. And you can see there's really the top two. Education is the top field, and then the health professions and related fields are the second. Everybody else runs a real I was going to say not even a very close third position. So those two positions garner the most graduate degrees in the across the university system. So this shows you the top 10 fields in graduate completions. Okay, then this is the information. This is the National Science Foundation information relative to the expenditures in research and development in fiscal year 16. And a little caveat there about the sourcing is that the NDSU actually provided the current data, as the HERD survey is not yet publicly available, but this is the current data that will then become publicly available. So NDSU's chart and UND's chart, and the same thing, UND provided the most current data. And then these are the folks at NDSU and UND that do only research. These are not the classroom PhDs. These are the folks that are focused on research at those two institutions. And now let's move on. All of that is the publicly available data. Now let's move on to creative activities. Ellie and Ryan developed a Qualtrics survey that was sent to all 11 institutions and asked them, and different institutions did it in different ways to compile that information, but nevertheless, they responded to the Qualtrics survey. Should the board want to continue moving forward in this, and this falls to those of us that might be doing it, or whoever might be doing it, and that is that we need to define more clearly the categories for tracking these activities. And right now, of course, the lion's share, the huge lion's share of creative activities within the university system are happening at UND and NDSU. They both have digital measures, which is a way to track this sort of activity. It's a software that both of them have. And so, you know, as one that went through this process with our IR people, I would certainly recommend that they use this software package. But we would continue to use the Qualtrics survey for the other 9 institutions, but the lion's share of the information would be coming out of NDSU and UND. Now, what you're going to look at here are the raw numbers. I will say these are undoubtedly underreported. These are very, very busy people, and we had a very quick time to ask them to fill out these surveys. However, the IR folks here tell me that the trends are likely representative of the activities system-wide, and we'll see why when we do a comparison between the graduate activities as well as the research. So again, some fields are probably underreported, and as I said, they're very busy folks, and we had to compress time for the reporting on that. And again, the big caveat is this is a snapshot, first time through. We're trying to come up with a comprehensive picture of creative activities. This is our very first time through. Once we do all the definitions and figure out how to do this again, we will do it better, and it'll be a more comprehensive picture than what we have currently. So first, total creative activities. And I'll do a slide where you can actually read this at some point, because this is, I know, pretty small, but you can see there are certainly some lead disciplines. Peer-reviewed publications, this is sort of the gold standard for research, is if you're doing a peer-reviewed publication. And then the non-peer-reviewed publications. And then, no surprise there, who tops out on artistic performances. And then these are, staff and faculty that are on editorials, do editorial work for journals, or they do reviews in various journals as well. And then awards, honors and awards. Again, all of these that you've just seen are self-reported, so it really, it was incumbent upon individuals to get in there and to do these reports. And for the vice presidents of research that work so very hard on getting this data to us and putting that together. So then in creative activities, these are the top 10 fields. And then just a reminder of the graduate programs in the state where the top 10 fields are. And then you take a look at it, many of the graduate completions in the top fields and the creative activities mirror each other. So these trends, we believe these trends are fairly accurate. So the conclusions, nothing amazing here. Some programs are teaching intensive programs and there's not a lot of creative activities, i.e. publications, for example, that may come out of those fields. Other programs are research intensive, so they might not have a lot of graduates in them, but they have a lot of publications that come out of them relative to their research. And in some of them, they do both. They're teaching intensive and they produce a lot of substantial creative activities. And this is for informational only. I don't know what the chancellor has envisioned for the next step on this. I think that if we're going to move forward, if the board wants to see something like this, we just have to systematize it better than we have it currently, and you would have a more accurate picture, although I think this gives you a good snapshot of where we're at right now, and that concludes my presentation.
Dr. Scogan, thank you. Chancellor?
Yeah, I just want to thank Dr. Scogan. You know, his modesty, like, I'm just a community college president. First off, that's important in itself. He's got 2 books published, as I recall, and he did have the chancellorship for a couple of years, and he did run another college before that. So you can't dodge that too much. But part of the reason I asked him to do it is he is leading our mission studies, and as you see in the goals we briefed today, research is one of the key things we do for the state. Diversify the economy, and I want to thank him and everyone who contributed. This is the first step to finding where we are. And it's hard to go forward if you don't really know where you are. And the real promise I see is this digital database of research the 2 big schools have, and then we can build on the surveys of the other ones. But thank you for your effort you've done at this point. And you know, this is something we can talk about during a retreat, how much time the board can put on research while we're working on workforce. You know, I hate to slow down on looking at research, but if workforce is the priority right now, then the board's attention, you know, we can go slower on this one. But I'll defer to my bosses on how much energy they have. But you're not off the hook. Your task force is still there, and we'll keep working on the digital data. You know, that's a good step right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have Dr. Mason, or was that encompassed?
Yeah, assuming there's no questions for Dr. Scogan. Okay. Dr. Mason.
Yes, thank you. The chancellor asked that the governance study group continue. I'm hearing an echo as I talk, so is it better to refer to President Hogan? He can do this report.
No, we're fine, Dr. Mason. We can hear you fine.
Okay, great. The chancellor asked that the governance study continue. It became necessary to differentiate the work of 2 groups then, the board governance committee and the chancellor's governance committee. So a revised chart has been created with a focus on the work of the chancellor's cabinet. The scope of the study is to be responsible for leading ongoing assessment and improvement of cabinet performance by actively engaging in activities such as assisting the chancellor in developing and implementing meaningful onboarding processes at a system level for new presidents, developing goals for cabinet performance and benchmarks for measuring cabinet effectiveness that would then be considered by the full cabinet, assisting the chancellor in developing a self-assessment process, conducting cabinet self-assessments, the results of which the chancellor will report to the full cabinet, creating opportunities for continuing professional development, and assisting the chancellor in selecting study topics, developing task forces, and otherwise determining the optimal role of the cabinet in exercise activities. The current study members consist of myself, Chancellor Hagerup, President Hogan, and Mr. Kennedy, President Kennedy. And that concludes my report.
Dr. Mason, thank you. Any questions for Dr. Mason? We appreciate very much your input, Chancellor.
I just want to thank Dr. Mason. You don't know that she's quite the accomplished expert on things governance, administration as part of her career. She obviously has been incredibly helpful to the State Board Committee, and everyone can rest easy. We're making no additional demands on your time for the governance study. This is for the cabinet because they are the 11 professional educators who spent collectively, I tried to count it up one time, but hundreds of years in higher ed. They have respective fields of interest as well as publications. And one item that the governance committee of the state board asked, Chair Ness asked this, is we more methodically tap into that wisdom in their readings and information to feed to you, through Christy, who's doing a great job right now sending you readings, but tapping into that and then finding better ways to improve how we function as a cabinet. And as already mentioned, one of them is a retreat of sorts with the cabinet, but no action for you. There's just so you know what we're working on to better serve the system and be your extended think tank as you need us to work on things.
Yeah, so thank you. Any comments from the board? Moving ahead, other reports. Very importantly, item number 23, North Dakota Student Association, Mr. Jacob Daly. I will ask Bismarck, is Mr. Daly at the Bismarck location?
No, he is not.
Okay. Dr. Prashani, is Mr. Daly at your location?
Madam Chair, this is Nick Evans. NDSA had elections last month, so Mr. Daly is no longer the acting president of the North Dakota Student Association. I believe the new president is a gentleman by the name of Caleb Deshock from UND. And I'm not sure if they've done their transition yet, so he may not have been aware that he needed to give a report today.
Mr. Evans?
I apologize for the confusion.
That's okay. Thank you. We will miss that update, but look forward to it next meeting. We'll move on to item number 24, Staff Senate, Mr. Andy Wickford.
Playing musical chairs here, so I'll just step up so I'm closer to the microphone.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank the board and its members for allowing the staff to give an update at each of the meetings. It's my pleasure to serve on this board, and I thank you very much for that. As we've been talking about budget cuts and constraints and so forth, I don't want to be like a broken record, but we all know the situation we're in. So I think the staff at the campuses are doing their best to make do with the situations that are coming up in front of us. So with that, though, I think morale at the campuses is at a low point, and that's understandable. But I think they're doing the best that they can with the constraints that we are in. The good news, as the chancellor pointed out just a little while ago, the budget's in, we're good, and now we can move forward. So now we know where we're at. Just a couple quick comments that the state staff senate is planning their face-to-face meeting. It's upcoming in June, I should say, June 21st and 22nd at Dakota College of Botano. Just for reference, each year the staff, every month we meet by interactive video, but once a year we get together in the summertime and we try to move it around the state. Last year it was in Williston, this year it's in Botano, and we'll get together for roughly a day's time, over 2 half days technically, but we're going to get together and kind of review some information, talk face to face, and discuss ideas of mutual concern. A couple things that we're going to talk about for sure is the legislative session, things that have come out of the legislative session this session, and how we can partner up and be a part of the university system and work together. Keeping our staff senates active, that's one thing that we're going to continue to do as well, or do the best that we can. Promote morale in spite of these budget cuts, and continue to work together with the students and the faculty and the administration on the various campuses. We are one system, we need to work together on that. So that's what we'll do, and we'll meet in Botano in the lovely Turtle Mountains Dakota College of Botany was hosting this year. So I want to thank Michael too for arranging those, the meeting location in June. Just real quickly, each of the board members, I send out the updates that are compiled on a monthly basis, and I just want to highlight a couple of them. First one is from Mayville State University. You can read these through at your leisure if you want to, but there's a lot of information in there. But first, from Mayville State University, they presented an award called the Orville Johnson Meritorious Service Award to a staff member earlier this month, employee recognition banquet. And I apologize if I get this gentleman's name incorrect, but his name is Rick Karbarjevic, I believe. He's a staff senate member and admissions recruiter at Mayville. So he was awarded for his service to the university. Two more, if I may. UND today is hosting their staff recognition banquet. I presume it's a luncheon event, so it's happening as we speak, I believe. That's being held on the UND campus today. It's a Spring Fling annual staff recognition event. Lastly, Valley City State University. Last month, I mentioned this at the last meeting last month. That was Staff Appreciation Month. They gave out bags of candy. I'm sure the dentists, don't want to hear that. But anyways, they gave out candy as treats. But the HR office also gave out treats as well to the staff on campus. So with that, that's my report real quickly. And thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Wickford, thank you very much. Any comments for Staff Senate report? Hearing none. Item 25, Council College Faculty. We have no report at this time. Dr. Pining, if you would like to join us, yes. Oh, maybe,
Thank you.
There you go.
Nick gives you a chair, I do staff.
When I listen to the staff senate reports, I think you're much more fun than we are. Just a couple of words. CCF did not meet, but there have been some developments. The chancellor already referred to this, and I would like to address that a little bit. From the MDSU Faculty Senate, there was a resolution. That resolution has gone over to the different faculty senates across the system. And I think all of them are discussing the resolution. And here I would actually like to thank both Don Martin and the Chancellor for reaching out to NDSU Faculty Senate and several people there and go and visit the different campuses to discuss the issues where faculty are mostly concerned about. And like the staff, the faculty are extremely concerned about the budget cuts. And what the impact of them will have. And there are certain other issues. So there is unrest among the faculty, unfortunately, but it's almost unavoidable in these kind of dire financial situations. And the idea that came from NDSU was to have kind of a conference where students, staff, faculty, the NDSU office, as well as the board would be, and maybe even legislators could come together and talk about this. And again, I'm very deeply encouraged that the Chancellor looks positively towards that and is taking this under consideration. And I have to say the feedback that I got from NDSU was very positive of the meeting that they had both with Vice Chair Don Martin and with the Chancellor. So that's my report.
Dr. Pining, thank you. We value the work of CCF. Are there any questions or comments for Dr. Pining? Yes, Chancellor.
And if I could, it was a very good meeting. I want to thank Vice Chair Morton for adjusting his schedule to be there. I also met with UND. I'll be meeting with Minot here shortly. And something that did come out, obviously there's lots of angst, rightly so, when you have cuts of this size and we are losing people are on the job market. But there was a recognition that they value the board. And it was said in the context by a couple of faculty members that on the notification period being shortened, they appreciate the campuses having the latitude and all the rest, but they actually compliment the board as a representative of the state of North Dakota that they trusted your judgment on many of the things. And so I thought that was important to know that maybe the letter didn't quite capture that, but they did acknowledge the effort by the board to be deliberative about these things. You can only put so much in a letter, but they expressed that personally because you spent hours on that issue and went back and forth. under, enormously, important times in the budget. But I just wanted to share with you that there was that feedback too, in case it's been lost in the translation, that they did acknowledge the complexity of your job and you're trying to render judgments under pretty tough circumstances.
Thank you, Chancellor. And this board absolutely values the work of the faculty. And we feel that wholeheartedly. Are there any comments, any further comments regarding the 3 reports? Hearing none, is there any public comment for this meeting? Hearing none, assessment of the meeting and future agenda items. I'll begin with our legal counsel, Mr. Nick Vaughn. Do you have any comments or items for us?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, when this was going to be an in-person meeting, I thought it would be a good time just to proactively talk about kind of how we're using Ivan meetings more and what that could mean open meetings wise. We're going to do our best here to manage the fact that there's not a quorum at any one location, but if that does happen, we need to be mindful because the microphones have to be muted in order for someone to speak on camera, that we don't want to have discussions that could appear to be board action. So again, this is just a proactive, not warning, that's too harsh, but just something to think about as we do this. I think this meeting went well, but just something for us all to think about as we use these meetings more and more.
Mr. Vaughn, thank you. Any other comments regarding the assessment of the meeting or future agenda items?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Kevin Milliker, Mike Ness had talked earlier briefly about the presidential contracts and the evaluation system and so on and so forth. Time is moving forward on all of those. And even if they don't get completed by this evaluation period, we want to make sure that as we go into the evaluations that we have those set for the next time through. So I would agree with, and I think Mr. Ness mentioned it earlier, that we should move forward and try and get that on the agenda as soon as possible. And I would agree with that. And I don't know if the May meeting is appropriate, but certainly June we'll start the evaluation process all over again. So the sooner we can get that talked about, and that will most likely take a couple readings would be my guess, as most things have in the past. So, we're into June already on that issue. And so I firmly believe that we need to get that done. And that includes the Chancellor's evaluation and contract as well.
It does. Dr. Milliker, thank you very much. And we will look to our governance committee and Mr. Ness to further that those items. Chancellor, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just to reiterate for all the presidents, as for myself, the current evaluation will be done like last year. The meetings, the drafts, so it's factually correct, and then meet with the board chair. And what Dr. Milliker is getting to is the tiered system, which will allow a more manageable workload, will require the board to deliberate. Is actually a fairly interesting discussion item at the governance committee, because we have to shift a group of presidents at that time. And we don't anyone misinterpret like, oh, why is my contract shortened or lengthened? What does that mean? It's purely an administrative stretch, but as Member Ness pointed out, we'll probably need a spreadsheet, because if you extend it, then you're giving 18-month contracts. If you shorten it, you're giving lesser month contracts. And so that's what he's getting at, that we probably need to come to a decision before that June contract meeting, because it could affect at least the number of months added to or deleted from the contract you're about to sign under the current existing eval system, just to get us to the tiered system. So it has nothing to do with the substance of evaluation. It's just the term of the contract. So in case there's anybody there getting concerned about what that was about. So,
Chancellor, thank you. Any other comments before the board? Hearing none, I'd like to wrap this up. I'd once again like to thank Dr. Sando for joining us. Dr. Shabani, thank you very much for joining us and staying with us. We appreciate that. All of the participants in this meeting.
Like a bad
Thank you. NDSU. We would also like to ask for everybody's patience. We're doing very well with these Ivan meetings. We appreciate your patience as we work through the issues. And do remember, almost everybody is at home at this point. So only a few people traveling. We appreciate the safety that that brings to mind. There being no further business before the board, the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Nick.